we chose this topic because we believe that this is a rather underappreciated aspect of machine learning, is all the data that goes into AI, and I think actually is often underrepresented or underestimated just how much data is used and how much, I think we all know that models are trained on data, but I think there's an entire underbelly of the pipeline that is just not spoken about. And today we wanted to give center to that. We also wanted to challenge some conversations around data sovereignty, data governance, and how data is generally managed in current AI pipelines. So my name is Siobhan. The seed for this workshop was planted about a year ago, where I was personally involved in some conversations, but that were part of a broader conversation around just the general ethics around including, for example, data labelers and how we can all work together towards a better future. I think we were increasingly distressed around the lack of insights into the data worker industry and how it was just sort of being taken for granted that data would continue to be produced without better standards. And so this started the conversation around data, and of course it belongs to an entire ecosystem. So from that and bringing in the fantastic team who I'll call onto stage now to introduce themselves, we were able to come up with this workshop. And today we really hope to hear from you as well. We'd like to get perspectives through your questions, but particularly through the breakout session, which will be happening soon, where we've prepared some prompts and we'd really like to learn from you. So at this time, I'd like to invite the team to just come in and briefly introduce themselves, so you can just get an idea of who's been doing really fantastic work for a really long time to make today possible.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you very much for making it to our workshop. It's been months in planning, and we're very grateful to be able to have this workshop with you. We have very wonderful things planned. My name is Chris Emezue. I am founder of Landfreaker and researcher at Miller. And I represent different communities too around working on AI on the African ecosystem.
Hello everyone, thank you for coming to our workshop. My name is Jessica Ojo. I'm a researcher at Miller. I'm also a researcher at LLMs AI and Mesocan. I work a lot with the evaluation space, where I'm trying to build benchmarks and frameworks around how we evaluate performance of African languages in the technological space.
Hello, good morning. My name is Aremu Anoluapo. I am a computational linguist, and I also work at LLMs AI, majorly in linguistic-related roles, looking at how to better curate data, techniques, and paradigms to ensure there is more inclusivity in the way we curate data. I'm also a proud member of Masakani and also Linguistic Island.
My name is Tapelo Sindani. I'm a PhD student at the Data Science for Social Impact Research Lab, and I also represent a couple of affinity groups like the Deep Learning Indaba X, South Africa, Masakani, the Honzula. So the Honzula, not a lot of you would know, we are trying to bridge the gap between computational linguists and computer scientists, just to learn from each other. But yeah, thanks.
Thank you. And just a deeper introduction to myself, I'm Siobhan. I'm a PhD student. Actually working in computational neuroscience, but I'm increasingly drawn to the AI equity and fairness space. So I've been very grateful to engage with this community through the Worldwide Dishes Project, which was grounded in collecting cultural artifacts, but using food as a lens into culture. So I'm very excited to be continuing the conversation today. In addition to the amazing team who have really, really done, a lot of work and at odd hours, because we've been in all different time zones, we have an amazing lineup of speakers today. I'll be introducing Joan Kinyua in a moment for the first keynotes, but really just the engagement from the people proposing lightning talks was really fantastic to see how many people were already engaging with this conversation, and we're excited to share this today. Just in closing, before I hand over to Aremu, who will be emceeing this first part of the session, I think what we'd really like today, as I mentioned briefly at the beginning, is we'd really just like to keep the conversation going. So please, please ask questions. Please engage during the breakout session. We'd really like to hear from you. And a goal of ours is to write a report. So we'd really like to be able to share with the broader community just kind of a snapshot of what the conversation around data in Africa is currently. And your contributions will be incredibly valuable in achieving that goal. So at this time, I'll invite Areme to the stage.
Thank you so much, Shaban. My name is Aremu Anoluwapo, and to start we will be inviting Johan. She is a digital rights activist and the founding president of Data Labelers Association of Kenya, a grassroots organization advocating for the rights and well-being of workers behind AI system. Yeah. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah. So my name is Joan Kinyua. Going to start with a little bit of a backstory about myself. Yeah, and I hope by the end of everything, you'll have already figured the journey from where we started to where we're at as Data Labelers Association. Yeah, so my name is Joan Kinyua. I'm a former data labeler by experience and an organizer by necessity. And today, the proud president of the Data Labelers Association of Kenya, a worker-led movement that was born not from privilege, but from pressure, from pain, and from purpose. Let me take you back to 2017. That year, I began a job that I thought would change my life. I started working as a data labeler, a role I thought that most people did not even know existed. But I was thrilled. Finally, I was interacting with computers that had always been a dream of mine. You see, I had once hoped to study for computer science. I wanted to be identified as a woman in tech, but never got a chance. Friends say, go for business. That's the most practical. My family told me tech was rocket science, meant for others, so I enrolled in international business. I even worked in the field, but I didn't finish the course, the perks of being a firstborn in an underprivileged African home. Deep down, I knew it wasn't for me. I love writing, I love structure, I love systems. I'm deeply organized, but that job, admin job, that life, not for me. It felt like I was walking around in someone else's shoes, tight, uncomfortable, and never meant to fit. Then everything changed. My sister got a job at a company, an organization called Summer, and came home each day talking about the computers, the tasks, the energy. I'm thrilled. My heart lit up. I knew immediately this is it. I quit my admin job with no job lineup. Just a belief that I was finally heading to the right direction. I begged my sister to mention my name to the trainers, to get me into the training. Eventually, I got a call. I poured my whole self into the training. I got perfect scores in every single test. I wasn't just good, I was thriving. I was fortunate enough to get a role immediately after the training. And there, my journey of data labeling began. As a data labeler, my role was to teach AI models how to recognize and interpret the world around them. For example, in self-driving cars, we had to draw boxes and add tags and color everything on and near the road, vehicles, pedestrians, road signs, even shadows, and raindrops splashing on the ground. In other projects, we labeled and tagged household objects to train self-cleaning vacuums. I know everybody knows about the vacuum robots or the Zumbas. Everybody knows them. Imagine working long hours, day and night, with no social protection, no medical coverage, no recognition. You're not paid for overtime, and that was our daily reality. I worked in all capacities, starting from a tasker, then progressed to a reviewer, a super reviewer, and finally I became a trainer. That progression was only possible because of the quality and consistency of my work. I was focused, I was determined, and I was always striving for excellence. If my work hadn't met the standards, I wouldn't have advanced through the ranks. But across these roles, the cracks in the systems were glaring, and we all saw them. The first clue was early in on the demand started becoming weird by being asked about cannibalism. Example, how does the human flesh taste? Or how do you skin a person alive? To annotating dead bodies. For what purpose, you may ask? Well, I don't know. This question, there was nobody you can ask about. Matter of fact, who was there to answer your questions? See, everything in this space is top secret. Another major clue that came through was the role as a trainer. One of the most troubling tasks we were assigned to do is screenshots our earnings on the dashboards and edit them. Yes, actually alter them to make it look like we are earning far more than we were. Why? To lure more people into trainings, boot camps, and we even trained on how to do it. Only when you look back, you do realize how deceptive and how deeply broken the system is. And then came the awakening. In 2023, I became a research assistant to a fellow called Barhan Tai from the University of Stanford in an AI harms research. Part of my role involved drafting a questionnaire for the workers and conducting interviews to my fellow data workers. And the conversations changed everything for me. Our respondents shared how constantly moving in and out of homes due to instability of work. Another had undergone a cornea operation from prolonged screen time and eye strain. The more I listened, the clearer it became. It wasn't just an individual hardship; it was a systematic problem. Fast forward to December 2024, I lost my own platform account, one I had maintained since 2018, shut down for a vague reason, violation of community guidelines, with the illusion of an appeal process. This was not an isolated case. During the interviews for the AI Harms project, I had over and over again accounts deactivated without warning, often on payday, when you're really waiting for that cash. Cutting of workers off from their income in an instant. Well, this happened to me. It broke something inside me, and that was when I felt like change is really needed as soon as possible. I reached out to Barhan again and I asked her what could be done. And after that, a chain of conversation and various suggestions on what type of organization to need to start. We ultimately settled for forming an association. Other options would have taken too long before anything would have materialized, or we were not inclusive of workers. And that's how the Data Labelers Association was born. We are just workers with more than 5 years of experience and absolutely nothing to show for it. No job security, no recognition, not even the basics. But we are not alone. We began to connect with stakeholders, and one of the organizations that really held our hands is called Siasa Place. They taught us the foundation of advocacy and activism. We learned everything from scratch. Along the way, we were fortunate enough to meet like-minded allies, people who had been fighting for data workers long before we had a voice, and that solidarity gave our cause strength and momentum. This journey has come with its fair share of challenges. We've had to be creative and sensitive in organizing. Many workers are bound by strict NDAs, scared of losing their jobs, or unaware of their basic labor and human rights. Union busting tactics are rampant, and fear is real, but so is our determination. At Data Labelers Association, we are not just complaining, but we are here for the action. We won a policy hackathon some time back to develop a code of conduct for AI data workers, a milestone that validated our vision and approach. Since then, we've drafted the first version of the code of conduct alongside a model contract. You may ask why a model contract. It's because Most of the people in the AI field are being given contracts that are either 35 pages, and you're given 5 minutes to sign the documents, which means that you don't even have time to even read what is written in the documents. At times, it's the jargon, it's the language that people don't even understand what you're signing up against here. So both are rooted in our lived experience and designed as practical, actionable frameworks for ethical and fair AI work. The final version will draw a global benchmark, including ILO and ILO standards, the EU AI Act, and the Modern Slavery Act. Other relevant policies that address challenges facing work and other relevant policies that address the challenges faced by workers. We are aiming to finalize these documents by mid-September, after which we'll begin campaigning and sharing them with BPO platforms and local and international policymakers, researchers, and academia as a starting point for change. When we presented the first drafts, the level of worker engagement was inspiring. It wasn't just about raising concerns anymore. It was about shaping the future, turning lived experience into policy. We know the journey ahead won't be easy, but we are ready for the crisscross. We are ready to crisscross the trenches until these documents are not only finalized but adopted. Because ethical AI starts with ethical labor, and we are here to make that real. You might ask, why does this matter? Let me take a moment to reflect on what we are really doing. We are building something monumental. We are labeling data for self-driving cars tailored for San Francisco roads, technology that's not even accessible to most of the people doing the work. We are building tools that discriminate against us. We are feeding the AI systems like recommending engines, robotics, and medical algorithms that are now reshaping the world. But we are completely invisible. No recognition, no policy, no power. You see, in the long run, you all see AI, you don't see us. You don't see the mothers photographing their toddlers' diapers change for a promise of pay that rarely comes. You don't see the endless task rejections or the nights spent out refreshing for the platform, hoping to get a task that could possibly put food in your table. You don't see the swollen legs, the arched backs, the physical toll of the digital labor. You don't see the youth with university degrees being treated as disposable just because the human hands behind machine learning. That's why the Data Labelers Association exists. Not out of convenience, but out of necessity. What needs to change? We need enforceable rights, contracts that protect us, pay that reflects our value, and systems of accountability. We need recognition. AI does not work by itself. It works because we work. We need to move from being tools to being co-creators. What can you do? Acknowledge us. Include us in funding, policy, research, and media. Demand transparency in AI supply chain. Partner with us, not as beneficiaries, but as leaders. To the policymakers in the room, to the funders in the room, and to the tech builders in the room. If you want ethical AI, you must recognize the people building it. If you want inclusive technology, you must start with inclusive labor. If you want justice tomorrow, you must address the injustices today. We are no longer invisible, we are no longer voiceless, and we are no longer waiting. We are here, we are rising, and we are not going anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yuan. That was a powerful presentation. Sorry, could you hold on, because people could have a question. In just 2 minutes, are there any questions whatsoever? Any of the audience might want to ask her before she leaves.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Albert. I'm also from Kenya. My question is looking back, right? So data labeling, and it's kind of like new jobs, right? These were jobs that never existed 10, 15 years ago or something like that. And so the struggles of these new jobs, my question basically is, are we seeing any patterns in terms of labor rights and all these kind of things for these new jobs from what we had in the past? For example, if you look historically, for example, coal miners, right? They went through a lot of issues before they jobs could be saved before they could get a fair compensation for the work they were doing, or even truck drivers or train drivers, right? So every time in the global economy there is a new job, there are all these challenges that come with it. Are you seeing any similarities, and what can we learn from that we can maybe accelerate the conditions, or in improving the conditions of these new jobs?
I'd answer that by saying, first of all, I think there are similarities, yes, but I'm not sure if the coal miners were being listened to, because first of all, nobody's listening to us, especially on a local, when we're speaking of being local, and everybody's just busy making decisions for this line of work or this type of work or this sector with the knowledge gap that is in existence, and nobody wants to include the workers to just know what they're exposed to and all those things. Secondly is the fact that these people are really moneyed. The big tech company, the organization are really moneyed, and most of the organizations do not want to be on the side of the workers. They want to be on the side of the big tech. So I don't know if the conversation that we're having this time around, or this with this type of work, was the same we're having during the mining days, but it's just that even the systems are not for us. For example, the president of Kenya recently signed a bill past the first stage, but that bill is really bad. From the description of workers, from the description of employers, and from the rules and the provisions of that bill, it states that nobody can sue the BPOs, even nobody can sue the big tech, no matter the damage that they've done. So that means nobody's for the workers, unless we now go to this side where we have the tech people, where we have the academia, where we're in the middle of everything. If we do not demand for tech justice, if we don't demand for ethics, then I don't think the systems are for us.
MC, do we have time for more questions? Okay.
Thank you very much for an excellent keynote, and for drawing attention to a very important issue. I teach. My name is David. I teach at a university in Saudi Arabia. This is my first in Daba. I spend a lot of time with my students teaching them how to label data, because it is such a fundamentally important part of learning how to build AI products, to understand where the data is coming from and how it's being labeled. So it is absolutely a vital piece of the value chain that is clearly getting not just undercompensated, but exploited. The question I have is a little bit about the market structure of data labeling. So you mentioned self-driving cars, so I'll just use that as an example. So presumably Tesla or Waze or Waymo are not directly employing data labelers in, say, Kenya. So can you explain the intermediaries and how that works? Is it a company in Kenya that they subcontract with, or how does that work?
Yeah, so I'll respond to that, because there are two ways I'll respond to that. One is the BPO, where it's the business processing outsourcing, where they purportedly say they get jobs from the big tech company, or the big tech companies approach them for them to have manpower. The BPOs have manpower so that they can do these tasks. And the other form is the platform, where you have a platform and all these tasks are there, and then you work on them depending on which is available and what you're comfortable doing, because most of the time it's just free flow. You might go from tasking from the first task being annotating a self-driving car, and the next maybe 1 month you're doing very hardborn projects, and the next month, it's just a free flow of things. You don't know who the end product is, you don't know who the owner of these projects are, but it's just there, and you cannot pinpoint where this data is coming from, and where this data is going to. Usually the other things are very top secret.
Thank you so much, Joan, for the presentation. So now we will be moving on to the round of applause, please. Yeah. Now, we will be moving on to the first phase of the lightning talks, where we are going to have 4 presenters, each of whom would present for maximum of 10 minutes. And please, for those who are going to present, please watch Tapelo. Once it's 7 minutes, it's going to signal, so you start rounding off the presentation because we are slightly behind schedule. So I'll be inviting Praise Amonye, who would be presenting the topic Blood, Bytes, and Borders, Rethinking Data Sovereignty in AI-Driven Malaria Diagnosis in Africa.
Good morning. Sometimes when they call you first to speak, you don't know where to start, either to ground to open for you to just enter. My name is Praise Amonye. I am originally from Nigeria, but I reside in Benin Republic. I am an AI researcher and an advocate for public health. It's really interesting because when I saw these, I was to contribute to this because it's something that has been very much related to my research work. So I want to start with something here. Now, imagine a lady or a young girl. Let's give her name. Anybody? Suggest a name. You said? Hope. Okay, let's use Hope. So Hope is in sub-Saharan Africa and she has fever. Her mom runs to her and says, "What's wrong with you, Hope?" Hope says, "Mommy, I'm feeling quite hot." Her mother picks her up, rushes her to the clinic, a local clinic close to the house. Maybe the doctor just takes her blood sample to do a test. Immediately that blood sample is taken, Hope's blood is placed under a microscope, and then we check. That means an image has been created. Now, when that image is created, a data point is created. The unfortunate truth here is that that data point goes far away to miles away to a country Hope may never go to in her life, and that data is used to train models that she doesn't even know anything about. Are you still here? All right. So, over 200 million malaria cases come up yearly in Africa. And as I said earlier, blood smear images become untapped AI mines for building our models and doing a lot of things. The part that I don't like in this process is just that many times when these data sets or when these data points are created, they are not used in the African context. They are not used to, help Africans. Many times we don't even benefit from this data. So the big question that we have to ask ourselves is, when these images are created, because for you to be able to train, let's say, your neural networks, you need images, right, to make that possible. When these images are created, who owns them is a necessary question we have to ask. Who decides how they are used? Do we have a voice in this data? Whose story gets told? Sometimes the people who even annotate this data end up being the ones telling the story and not we ourselves who owns this data. Data may be generated from Africa, but that does not mean that it is going to be used in Africa or used to promote Africa. It's a one-way street, right? First of all, we see that the data leaves Africa, the models are built somewhere else, and the benefits don't return to us. Many times we just have a little bit, or we enjoy a little bit from this data point that is generated from our continent. It is not just about a technical problem. Maybe Africans are not technical enough. It's just because that the power is not balanced. We are not placing the power in the hands of the Africans where this data is generated from. It's time to flip the script. In flipping the script, we have to see that our data is curated locally and that it is annotated by African scientists. Nobody can tell your story better than you. Who agrees with me? Yes, your story is best told by you. Imagine, I remember recently I saw a movie about the Amazons of Benin Republic. And as good as that story is, I realized that it was not well told. Because I have visited Boiko, which is actually the place, the Abome, beg your pardon, which is where the story actually started from. But it was not told by Africans. When our blood is taken from here, when our information is taken from here, it is not best told by, because we are the ones who had the experience, so we have to be the ones telling the story. Another part is that our policies has to be locally governed. There are restrictions that are being put sometimes. I sometimes want to have access to certain data sets, especially when I was doing my research work on advancing malaria treatment in Africa using AI and machine learning. I realized that I don't have access to certain data points or data sets because there were policies that were there that would not allow me to have access to some of these data sets. So for us to flip the script, we have to make sure that the local clinics are the ones that, when this data set is created from the local clinics, the local AI tools are being used. I enjoy the fact that I studied mathematics, so at least I know how to, I know the mathematics behind the model. So when we start creating these models, it is easier for us to bring it to our own contexts. Hello? And of course, it will lead to better health outcomes. You know that every time that a model is run, is created, and then we use it, we utilize these models, do you know that these models have benefits that come with them? They are returns. But who benefits from these returns? We have a community-led initiative, and our first initiative in Deep Africa, Benin, is fair pay for data annotation. When this data is annotated, we make sure that the payment is fair. Another is that the metadata has to be inclusive, and that means necessarily that whenever we want to annotate our data sets, we make sure that the information that comes, it comes in the local languages, so that the people who make use of this data in our African country, many times when the data starts from the process of you gather the data, you train the data, you build your model, and you deploy. When all that process goes on, the question is our voice and our language inside those data? And of course, as I said earlier, our consent must be sought after. From blood. From our blood, our bytes, and our borders. It is time for us to stop exporting our data, to start centering our data. I leave you with a question. When our blood becomes bytes, who owns the borders? Thank you.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. Next up would be Nadine Nibigira, who would be presenting using AI for securing critical information infrastructures. 10 minutes, after 7 minutes, please, is going to signify. Thank you.
Thank you. I am Dr. Nadine Nibigira. I come from University of Burundi, where I serve as a lecturer and research. Last 9 years ago, I was served as cybersecurity expert, analyst, and auditor to different organizations, local, regional, and recently last year, I was appointed as European Union CyberNet expert on cybersecurity. I am here today to present on how AI can help us in order to protect critical information infrastructure. As we know here, some of countries in Africa, we face the challenge of infrastructures. Imagine for a country one day you work and you see that all the system, financial, like governance, data set, all are down. This is due to that our traditional defense is not yet be able to combat those cyber attacks, which is built with AI Actually, when we look around, hackers are building like sophisticated solutions to combat our data. Our traditional infrastructure, which help us to defend our infrastructures now, are too slow to detect and involving threats. When we look at different infrastructures, different organizations, the existing tools to defend their infrastructure is not combating well, is not like interacting with sophisticated attacks which already deployed by hackers. Is why AI is here. AI is to help us to combat those kind of attacks, even the advanced one, even like the new one, as it will be improving like till the time. Actually, with AI allow to realize the anomaly detection. Even if it is a sophisticated attack, AI is able to deep analyze and give us like the proactive prediction to those attacks. Actually, AI can, as I said, it can help to treat intelligence fusion, as well prediction analysis, and AI is a very good and oriented solution, especially for the when it comes to isolate the system which is already compromised. Next use case where we analyze that here in Africa, most of organizations that are using email to communicate in different communications. Even here, when you see most of our communication, we use Gmail, we use WhatsApp. While those information can be sensitive, hackers actually use through those information and see really what we are doing. When I analyze the communication, I take the dataset of different language, different communication that was sending through different platform of communications. I realized that most of communications are having the problem of phishing. Around like 98% of attack which was coming with phishing. And then I trained the model in order to confirm that AI can really help in phishing detection. I found that really there are some AI algorithms which are there in order to help us. The system that I developed was like, it classified the email. When you receive an email, it detects if it is a phishing or not, and then send you the feedback on the action that you can do. Is why, dear public, we need really to use AI. We need to focus on our data. We need to analyze data in order to build the secure system, the secure data set, in order to combat all those attacks that can come. This action is not for me or you only. It's for governance, it's for companies, it's for I as researcher, you as researcher. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Chris? Yeah, so up next would be Onyewuchi Ngozi, who would be presenting combating plant pathogen spread in sub-Saharan Africa.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. I won't spend up to 10 minutes, I promise you that. And then my two first presenters have really done most of the things I need to say about data, who owns it, and then how it's being used. So, my name is Onyewuchi Njoroge. I'm a PhD candidate in Nigeria. So I'm working on, part of my research work actually has to do with plant, and then how we get data, collect data, curate it, and actually also publish it. So here, we worked on combating, although we're actually working on it, it's still in pipeline. plant pathogen spread across Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. So, bringing it into context, pathogens are the major problem that we have with our local farmers, our smallholder farmers. And then how they combat this pathogen spread is actually a very big concern. And most especially regarding to how data are being collected and curated. Like what the first presenter says, it's when this data are being collected, what else? What happens? How did it get out there, out of our borders? How did they even get collected in the first place and curated? So those are the contexts that we're actually looking at in this work. So the food security is, of course, we know that is a big threat, especially in this part of the world, regarding the outbreaks of pathogen. And then the major two sources we know is through the effect of climate change and then environmental degradation that we experience in most places in Africa. I will see that the major concern is that the smallholder farmers bear the huge burden of all these losses that comes as a result of these factors. Now, the statements that we come up with have been distilled into 3 points. That the current detection methods that are available out there are mostly reactive. Most of them are not incorporating the climate data and also the environmental data in most of what they push out to the GitHub. So what we intend to do is actually, we are not looking at what happens out there, but what's the pain points of these local smallholders, the farmers? What are the concerns? What are the problems they face? When they are, into their farming, and how those data are being collected. So we see that the delay responses leads to economic and agricultural losses, and you see that real-time forecasting tools for frontline farming has been also a challenge. We actually come up with a predictive model, the LSTM and the random forest. I'm not going to talk much about the predictive, but I'm going to talk more about the data and how they are being collected. So the sources are actually, our source of data was from on-farm observations. So we didn't dwell more on what's existing, but we tried to sit with the local farmers to understand their practices, how they go about with those things that can actually become data for us to actually build our models on. So we look at that there are so many local crude practices that they involve in, like burning of the bushes, of the trunks, burning of the leaves, soaking the cow dungs in water for days and then eventually spreading it. So these are the various practices that it gets into involved. And then we also ask them questions around if data has actually been collected from them, which they said that they are not usually in the picture. They are not usually in the table, when these data are being used. So, which is really of a big concern to us. And just as we know that our stakeholders are actually the extension farmers that we worked with and the local cooperatives. And the existing gaps were the paper-based records and the manual logs that were used to collect those data. Now, the challenges of the data collection, which is actually, the core of this talk, is that there's lack of quality and consistency regarding how those data are actually collected. There's no human loop, there's no the ideology, the wisdom, the practices in the loop in terms of how those data are being collected. And then the very measurement standards that were used were not really what was obtainable on ground. The infrastructure, they have a challenge of internet and power supply, of course, which is general. Then the socio-cultural barriers that have actually been a persistent issue in in the farms, then the language diversity and the literature levels. The prospects and the opportunities that we was able to, we envisage, obviously, that the disease management reduces crop losses and input costs, of course, which is, we know. Then the community-driven data empowers collective decision-making, and then also that these scalable open access platforms foster innovation and collaboration. Now, this is a call to action. The call to action is that we need to transition from being reactive to actually proactive in terms of understanding the smallholder farmers, understanding their pain points, understanding how this data actually collected and being used for their own benefit, and also incorporating the data, climate data, into what we do, so that we can be reactive instead of proactive in terms of our approach. And then we need to centralize the smallholder data as critical infrastructure for African AI. Then the needs for collaborators, and then of course funding, which is very critical. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And lastly, for the first phase, I will be calling on Livia Lucigi, who would be presenting data to delivery, designing LLMs for maternal health, impact in low resource settings. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Livia Lucigi, and I'm a machine learning engineer at Jacaranda Health, and I'll be doing this talk on data to delivery, basically the process of how to design LLMs for maternal health and impact in low-resource settings to highlight the place of African data in delivering solutions for the African context. So this is Millicent. She's a mom who's 37 years old. She's 8 months pregnant. She has a history of stillbirth and preeclampsia. She has a previous experience with mismanagement in hospital. She owns a feature phone, so she does not have access to the internet, and she lives in rural Kenya, a place called Busia. So unfortunately, with these traits, Millicent could be one of the 7,500 moms in Kenya who lose their lives every single year during childbirth. Fortunately, 90% of these deaths, at least in Kenya, can be prevented because 33% of them are driven by delay in seeking healthcare services, and then 55% are driven by provider-related challenges such as lack of medicine, lack of blood, lack of facilities. So with addressing that, we can be able to prevent that number. So for us at Jacaranda Health, we try and solve this through Prompts, which is a platform, a messaging platform. So on Prompts, we offer a wide array of services to the moms. Number one, we offer MNH messaging, MNH in this case being maternal and newborn health messaging. So we send moms a lot of information concerning where they are at their pregnancy journey. So if she's 3 months old, in her pregnancy journey, we tell her this is what you should be on the lookout for. This is normal, this is abnormal, and you should be seeking assistance from your professionals if you see this. And then we also send them appointment reminders. As part of the data that we collect from them is when they are expected to deliver. So we are able to calculate when they should be seeing the doctor for their appointments, and we remind them about it so that we can meet the minimum number of appointments that a mom needs to reach so they can notice any issues early. And then we also allow them to talk back to us through question and answering system. So they can send us questions. We know during the pregnancy journey, there are a lot of things that we're curious about. So you'd maybe feel the baby kick and you're like, is this normal? Or you'd be worried, if I take eggs, will my child get allergies? Because there's so many myths around pregnancy. So if a mom has any such questions, she can send it to us because many moms don't have access to the internet. Moms who do could Google the same. They could use ChatGPT or whatever other thing that they have access to. But our moms do not have access to the internet. They have feature phones. And so using our platform, they're able to ask us these questions. And then we have AI-based triaging, whereby every single question that they send to us, we scan and determine whether it's urgent or it's normal. If it's urgent, then we have a help desk
team that reaches them through phone calls and walks them through any procedures that they should be going through. Or we have even partnered with county governments and other organizations to be able to arrange ambulances so that they can be taken to hospital and such things. And then lastly, we receive patient feedback. So every single time we remind them to go for their appointments, we ask them after how they were treated. So were you treated with care? And then we receive a wide array of responses from I was treated with care, I received good care, to I was abused in the hospital, there were no doctors and nurses in the hospital. And so we capture all of this and share it with the county governments and country governments where we have expanded to, for them to be able to take action on improving the services that they offer to our moms. And so so we have, over the years, this chart starts from the year 2021 to 2024. So at the beginning, we used to handle about 2,000 questions in a day from the moms. But then last year, we had a massive jump to about 12,000 questions in a day. And we could not hire fast enough to increase the size of our help desk team, and that necessitated that we create an LLM to be able to assist with this work so that we are still able to reach our moms in real time. And that is where we show the place of African data in all of this. So let me just take you through how it all plays out before we get into the data. So our moms can send us an SMS using their feature phone, and then we have a model, an intent classifier that is hierarchical in nature. So it does a level 1 classification to get a general category, and then a level 2 classification to get a more granular category. And then as part of that intent classification, what is very important to us is also to determine the priority level. So if it's a low priority question such as can I eat avocados, that is handled by the LLM. But if she's talking about something like I am bleeding or I have been having a severe headache for the last 3 days, that is handled by our human help desk agent. So they go straight in to call them. So if it's a low priority question and we're handling that via the LLM, we have an LLM as a judge in the process that audits the response to make sure it passes our QA audit. And then if it passes, it goes to the mom directly. If it fails, it goes to the human in the loop. So the data, this is what our data looks like. It's question and answer pairs that we have been receiving over the years. So we used 1.3 million rows of data to be able to create this. And it's important for you to take note of the structure of the response. So we need to be able to greet the mom so she feels loved and welcome. We also need to empathize with her because it's a very sensitive time. And then share the medical information in simple language, English or Swahili, because that is what the model currently does. And then also highlight to her what is important for her to take note of, so she knows when to go to hospital. And then have we answered your question, just to encourage her to give feedback. And then this is the training methodology. We did continual pre-training to up the model's capabilities in Swahili and English and the MNH domain. And then we also did instruction tuning, now using the data to be able to fine-tune the model basically for question answering so it can handle the task. And then we are also currently working on an accelerator project where we are building a Swahili voice solution to provide life-saving information, support and connection to care for low literacy women like Millicent. And it's very common in Africa where you know your language, you can speak it, but if you're asked to text it out, it becomes a challenge, maybe because you do not know your language to that writing level, or maybe because the literacy levels in Africa really fluctuate. So for us to be able to reach as many moms as possible, we are working on a voice solution currently, so speech to text, where the mom sends us a question and then it's transcribed, and then that is fed into Uliza Mama, which is the LLM, and then now that is also fed to another model to be able to provide the response in speech that the mom can listen to. And so we have tried other commercial models and they could do well, but they do not sound like us. And I could imagine a Kenyan mom who speaks Swahili receiving a call from an LLM that doesn't sound like her. It creates a lot of distance and it takes away the empathy and relatability that she needs to be feeling. And so for this, we are also in the process of collecting 20 hours of voice samples at least, so that we can be able to have an LLM that speaks and sounds like our moms and represents our accent. So what is the result of this? We have been in so many rooms where we are being asked why we are still in the business of fine-tuning models, yet other big models such as GPT and Gemini have strong capabilities, especially in Swahili. But then there are so many issues we are facing with having commercial models. They do not represent our culture. A mom would ask, what can I eat maybe to get omega-3? And then the model would recommend something like salmon or dark chocolate, which is not accessible to African moms. And it's also not not available even in our context. Or a mom would ask, can I go for a massage at the midwives? It's important for us in our culture for a mom to go through such a thing, but then modern medicine would dispute that and then send the mom away and tell her to go directly to the hospital, which brings a bit of cultural friction. So with using African AI, African data, we're able to create AI solutions that are, number one, culturally and economically relevant, and they represent what is true on the ground. Number two, AI solutions that understand and respond to local languages and code mixed dialects like Sheng, which is slang in Kenya. I know we have Pidgin in Nigeria and many others in many African countries. So using African data can enable us to create solutions in this line. And then most importantly, we are also able to create solutions that understand low literacy moms, or even in other contexts, low literacy users. So if, for example, farmers who are low literacy, they can be able to use whatever solutions we create using the data that is available to us. So this is just to emphasize the place of African data in creating African AI solutions. Thank you. So you can test out our text demo over there. And then for voice demo, you need to have access to Telegram. But I look forward to your questions after the session.
Welcome back, everybody. We are very glad to have you back at the Centering Data for African AI workshop. We are very glad for the participation thus far. And now we would be moving forward to the second phase of the lightning talks. We will be inviting Amos, who is going to give a presentation on the topic, the data gap in African agriculture.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Amos Mwendwa, and for those who don't know how to really pronounce Mwendwa, it means the loved one. So in case we find each other just along the roads, just say Amos, the loved one. All right? Thank you. So I lead Miraki Digital Solutions, which is an umbrella, a company that covers innovation and also the digital aspect. And we have a startup called agro.io, which I happen also to be co-leading. And as of today, the topic is the data gap in African agriculture and why global AI models fail the arid and semi-arid land farmers. So, one, the background, history. In Africa, you find that we happen to be domiciling like 60% of the world's uncultivated arable lands, and which just contributes only 10% of the global agricultural output. And agriculture, especially in the arid and semi-arid lands, and I know for some of you will be like, why am I really focusing on the arid lands? Because that is where I come from, and most of my research is based on the arid and semi-arid lands. So you find that the yields are rather low, and also the climate risks are intensifying with time. All right? And so in Kenya, you find that the arid and semi-arid lands, they only cover 80%, which is also 30% of the population. And the characteristics, you find that these places are characterized by low rainfall, high temperature, and also particularly vulnerable to also drought and flooding. And so this is me. I am not just doing or talking things that I haven't done. I'm saying it out of experience. I recently started farming, doing farming on green grams. Back in Kenya, we call them dengu. And I started farming in Kitui County, but I didn't know what I was really getting myself into. And so I realized that around over 6,000 farmers who happen to be doing the same farming, they experience so many challenges, especially the climate, the resource limitation as well, and also market uncertainty,
like we don't know how the market works. For example, I tried asking them how much was Ndengu sold, how much was green grams sold last year. We didn't have any data. And I also at the same time, you find that Kitui is quite far, so I couldn't even track most of my farm activities remotely. And that was a very big challenge because I used to get numerous calls on, you can imagine when we are supposed to be having fertilizers being applied on our land, you just get random calls and someone tells you, so today we have decided we want to apply fertilizer. So in my mind, I was like, what are some of the elements that you considered for the crop to be applied fertilizer? And so I realized that I had to really be reliant on people, and that made the whole system inefficient and also risky. And so I got to also start a startup called agro.io, whereby we focus more on the agricultural side. And I also happen to be having, I think, my colleague, who is just seated somewhere, called Caesar Waweru. Thank you so much. But now, the main features that agro.io tackles is we are using AI-powered decision support, pest identification, using image recognition, also crop health and analysis tools, and integration of an e-commerce marketplace, especially for those who are selling their produce, and also for their certified seeds. But now, I might be giving you a very good story of how we are even having the prototype. We have a challenge. The challenge is data. And this is where the topic stems. And so what are some of the problems that I have been able to experience as well? Thank you. So we've realized, even as per the workshop, when we were having like our meetings, we realized there's the issue of data scarcity, context mismatch, also language. You find most of our farmers are in the rural places, so most of our models are much more into English, but I appreciate, I'm seeing some of the people who are developing AI models that are focusing on the local languages, like the Swahili. We also realize that there's the issue of bias in climate models. Some of the stations that we have, especially in our local areas, they don't have enough data for us to really analyze. And we have also infrastructure gaps. Definitely when you want to use AI, you need to use internet. And you find that most of our regions are not internet connected, and that makes the environment quite tricky for us to include the technological aspect as well. But I also got to know, or rather dig deep into what the impact of the data gap could really influence. And you find that there's an inaccuracy of advisory services, and also misallocation of resources as well, digital exclusion, and eventually you'll find that people are going through losses. I had a friend who recently did farming, about 10 acres. So in 10 acres, when you're doing wheat in Narok, the South Rift region of Kenya, you get around 100 bags. But last year, but 2, there was so much rain to a point whereby in those 10 acres, the guy only got half a bag. So that means that the challenge is quite increasing, because most of the people are really experiencing losses, especially in the agricultural sector. And you realize that without food, we cannot live, all right? And together with agro.io, I thought about it. So in as much as, yes, we're experiencing these challenges, what are some of the probable solutions that we need to really come up with, or rather call of actions? So first of all, we need to also start building local data sets. I had an opportunity of interacting with the North African side. There was a meeting that we had, and I realized that for them, they had very nice open data source. In Africa, I believe if some of you are coming from Africa, that's a very big challenge. And we also need to include AI models that really do the African type of crops. Like, for example, you find that most of these AI models, they do analysis from maybe wheat in Kansas. It's not the same wheat that we plant here in Kenya. And the other thing is that we need to also have like the public-private partnerships. So I'm also calling upon each and every one of you that we need to also partner to ensure that the agricultural data is cohesive. Thank you. And the other thing is that we need to also have the technological side being farmer-centered, meaning that we need to make them into our local languages. And so that's a quote that I got from someone whom I respect, and he says that if you want to make impact, make your home first, your neighbor is your second, and finally the whole world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful talk and presentation. Now we would be moving to invite our second keynote speaker. First of all, apologies. He needs to attend another event, so we need to bring him on board. So to our presenters, we are so sorry that we are prioritizing this talk. So I'll be inviting Dr. Girmaw Abebe, who is a principal research scientist and manager at Microsoft AI for Good Research Lab, where he leads the Africa team in developing AI solutions for agriculture, healthcare, diversity, and so many more. Yeah, Doctor, you're invited. Thank you.
Perfect. Good morning or good afternoon. Hi, everyone. My name is Girmaw. I lead the Microsoft AI for Good Lab here in Africa and based in Nairobi. I know I'm between your lunch and this presentation, so I hope we will have a quick and insightful conversation about how do we really center data into African AI. So when they invite me and trying to propose the title, I was thinking, how should I come up with it and how could I motivate it? And of course, the first thing first is thanking the organizers, right? It's not easy to organize a workshop, and I would like to thank all of them. But since I will be focusing more on data and problem, let's start from here. What do you see in this data? These are the list of organizers. Anyone? You don't see any data, any insight? Diversity, we have majority of what? Female organizers, which is good. At Indaba, we like to also stratify data across countries. Which country do you see dominant here? Nigeria, Mozambique, Kenya, South Africa. Webb, Shoban, and Rastage, I think they have South African roots. So I thought maybe I could use that data to motivate what I'm going to say, and using people with some roots in South Africa as well. One is Trevor, which is who likes Trevor here? Can you raise your hand? Perfect. I recently saw him in a conversation when someone asked him what makes African or AI in the global south different, and He literally said that because, you know, he traveled a lot, and he said, when I see technology, including AI, across the global south, whether it's India or Africa, he said it is really focused on solving a particular problem in the community. It's not me who said that, it is Trevor. So we like him, so we agree with him, right? So this motivates what I mean by problem-driven AI. The second one is another one who says the AI performance is directly tied to the data we have in size and quality. And I think both Ellen and Ia mentioned what they call peak data. They think we are approaching, you know, what we can extract from available data, which is true in a way because data is very important. But also I wonder, how can we say that we are approaching peak data when the majority of African context is not even in the data in the first place, right? So having that in mind, that shapes my title today, which is the need to talk about problem-driven and data-centric AI in Africa. To say that, who am I in a bit? Because AI is such a tricky technology. It has both positive and negative side as any technology. But my perspective today, which I'm going to share with you, is shaped by not my current work, but across a different trajectory I have done. I'm from Ethiopia originally. I did my undergrad there. I spent almost a decade in Europe doing graduate, postgraduate, and postdoc. I came back to Kenya 6 years ago to work for IBM research first and now at Microsoft. So when I try to think about AI, I try to, you know, have the different dimensions I have been through to shape my understanding today. So a quick note, as I said, how many of you know Microsoft AI for Good Lab? Can you raise your hand? Have you heard about Microsoft AI for Good Lab? No? 1%, 2, 3, good. 4, thanks Millicent. The idea is we try to use AI in applied research setting to help solve some of the world's biggest challenges across healthcare, climate change, natural resource conservation, equity, and so on. We have a presence across 4 continents and 7 countries lately. But as I said, we are more of an applied research team. So when I say AI for good love, people ask, is there AI for bad? Probably. But our perspective is really shaped by the book, I don't know if you had a chance to read, by Brad Smith, where he mentioned technology as a tool and weapon. Any technology we use from, you know, go back to industrialization, printing, mobile, social media, all has its own positive and negative side of it. And I do believe AI also has that dimension. But at least in our work, we use AI as a tool to really solve some of the greatest challenges across, you know, climate change, food security, housing care, you name it, you know, people moving and then migrating from one place to the other with different natural and man-made disasters. In that line, we work different projects in collaboration with non-profits, policymakers at government, regional or global, and academics. So these are the type of projects we do at Microsoft AI for Good Lab. And I'm not going to go through them and give you details, but what I want to say is we are open for collaboration. If you are working in academia, government, non-profits on critical problems facing Africa and the world, we are always happy to collaborate. But something I will highlight from our projects is every project has a partner at the bottom page. That means we as an AI team, we don't know the domain knowledge about agriculture or healthcare, so that we always collaborate with people who know the problem better, and we work as their support staff so that they could understand better. We provide them insight and build solution. That is a key. But if we come back to Africa, what makes us a bit unique and different? So many conversations happened at Indaba about how AI could be governed, the ethics, the sovereignty, the data sharing agreement, all that very important conversation. What I found it even more pressing is the challenge we have in Africa. Having said all the discussions happening, if we just zoom into Africa, we have so many challenges we need to address, both as a practitioners, as a policymakers here in Africa and beyond. If you think about connectivity, before even AI, in 2023 alone, only less than 40% of the people in Africa access internet compared to almost 90% in Europe. That's a couple of years ago. If you think about healthcare, of course, people in rural and marginalized communities are not having the basic healthcare service. That's the real challenge. If you think about food security, which is critical for us to survive, last year alone, 300 million Africans, over 20% of the population, have undernourished. Not only just mild, but chronic one. So I want you just to pause there. And why I keep saying we need to build AI in a way it's problem driven. This is our challenge. And if we don't work on this challenge, who will? Really, we have this challenge. And my perception actually well reflected by the State of AI in Africa report from CPIT at Strathmore in Kenya. They published this a couple of years ago. And what I like is they say we must stop copying and pasting techniques from the global north and focus on our unique challenge and solutions in AI and innovation fields. So when we come to this workshop, centering data in Africa AI, this is very critical. Problem-driven should be first. We need to focus on what others did somewhere in a different context, but what is our actual reality and how can we use this technology to solve that problem? I cannot stress enough the importance of having clarity on the problem we wanted to address. Usually when we work with the students, we are building this model because we have this data from this repo and look our AUC, it's great. But real life problem is complex. And I have a favorite quote from statistician John Kinyua. Is there anyone who knows about John Kinyua? Any fun fact? I was checking. I read that John is the first guy actually to coin the term bits, binary digits, and software for the first time. Just FYI. But my favorite quote from him is this one. An appropriate answer to the right problem is worth a good deal more than an exact answer to an approximate problem. When you work on AI for agriculture, healthcare, education, the key is not how great your model is. Do you understand the problem first? Because that problem is complex. We always work on data for AI solution development. But those common data sets we work on, they are actually a quick snapshot of the problem because they are collecting at certain instant. There is a lot of issue in quality, size, generalizability, local context, distribution shift of the problem. I work a lot in agriculture and food security space with governments and non-profits. And if you just pick food security, it has so many dimensions to it, starting from the soil, the climate, the crop, the disease, the insurance, the fertilizer. This is what I mean by real life. Problem is complex. The problem, not the solution. So solution could be simple, but we need to be clear on understanding the problem. When you say we are building AI model for this cancer detection, you could have different dimensions of the particular disease across population, across geographical area, across age group, across gender, across continent, across time. Because if we don't understand problem clearly, we run into a risk of affecting a certain segment of population wrongly, but most importantly, we may also waste our resource. We discuss about how AI or Africa doesn't have data, as the previous speaker highlighted, and competing. So if we don't spend enough time understanding the problem, we just run the risk of wasting a limited resource we have. One favorite paper from Nature at the bottom highlights so many papers published during the COVID era. When COVID came in, a lot of papers came in trying to detect COVID from images, from physiological signals, and so on. This study found that almost most of them, even if they are published and have great performance on a particular data set, most of them are clinically unfit, which means they are good research, they are good paper, but clinicians cannot use them. So that's what I mean by it's critical to understand the problem first. I keep saying that I have just only 2 messages today, which is how it's important to focus on the problem first and then next the data. Before I jump into the data piece, I keep saying understand the problem better. How do we understand the problem better in typical AI development process? It seems a cliche, but one thing very critical is how we need to involve multi-stakeholder participation. Because the fact that you have the data and you can code doesn't mean that you can build an AI model for healthcare professionals in your lab. You need to include domain experts, policy makers, decision makers, end users, not when you've done with the development process, but during the design, the development, and evaluation. It's not because some of the things you cannot do, but your partners feel a sense of co-development process. Here, like a few examples, we were engaging with Kenya Space Agency. As you could see, it could be very high-level meeting with the big bosses. It could be sharing ideas in conferences. It could be going into their small lab and work in their, coding and development process. It could be traveling with the team into rural Kenya to understand the context better. This gives you not the technical piece of the problem, but to have more understanding the different dimensions, why we are working on the problem, who is going to use them, why they are using, and what is the impact they are going to generate. Another idea which I think we published it recently is the need to have intersectional analysis for science and technology. And I put it here because it's equally applied for AI development process. Whether you are a good programmer or a director or a data engineer or a policymaker, it's clear no one can do it alone. And it's very important to have intersectional analysis of factors that are cross-boundary, across different social political dimensions, different contexts. Legal domain has a very different from ours, different from, religious bodies. Environmental condition like climate change and so on are very critical as well. So when you say intersectional, that means not just the fact, the variables but what the other dimensions, what the other bodies and organizations think about it. What you see on the screen is Professor Wangari Maathai, a very famous environmentalist in Kenya. How many of you know she is the first woman to receive Nobel Prize in Africa? Great. Besides that, she really pointed out, she's not an AI researcher, as you know, but she had this very great quote in her bio. She said, you may think you are doing the right thing, but in the local context, actually, you are completely off track. So try to visualize this in a sense of AI development for Africa. What's our local context? What's our priority? What's our problem? You may think the right thing, but if you don't include, just because you are using that data from MIT or something you found it in repo, doesn't mean that you are actually working on what's important. I hope by now we agree on the importance of really understanding the problem, encoding the local context into it, engaging different stakeholders so that we can understand the problem better. The next piece will be about data-centric AI. My title was Problem-Driven and Data-Centric AI for Africa. What do I mean by that? AI pipeline is often data model and evaluation sort of building blocks. I strongly believe that the data component is very critical. Usually we download a data and we run a model on it. I do believe that, to build a trustworthy AI, the data component of the pipeline is very critical. Why? Spending more time on your data gives you better understanding, whether there is skilled representation across different segments of the population, time, location, whatsoever. You may understand the annotations. Sometimes we say our data is annotated by the domain expert, full stop. Then, who did that? How many domain experts? Which one are easy to annotate? Which samples are difficult to annotate? How data is collected? Recently, we had a project in India, and when a team member checked the data, which tries to tag rice farms in India, all the locations are on the road. People were paid to collect data, but they were supposed to go into the farm and be at the center so that we can find the latitude and the longitude of that farm. But of course, someone was just driving a motorbike so that they just pick across the road. And you see on the visualization, you don't collect the data actually because you just pick location of the road, not the farm. Because someone doesn't walk like 10 meter or 20 meter into the farm. So when you check those, it gives you collection, quality, and other things, we call them systematic deviation that may go wrong in a data. I worked on this space when I was at IBM Research Africa across different healthcare problems, trying to understand in which part of Africa we have improved maternal, newborn, and child health, and which pockets of the continent are still lagging from the problem. We worked on dermatology, where we try to identify out-of-distribution samples in a model pipeline. My favorite one is the last one, when we try to understand representation analysis in academic textbooks. If you consider dermatology as a field, and the dermatologists that were trained on those academic books, we found that those books actually often have very small representation of examples and images of skin disease from non-Caucasian population. So you are a dermatologist trained on US in top medical school, but all the data that's being used to train you is actually skewed. That means you have different skin condition, how it manifests itself across white population is more clearer, but you don't have enough examples to understand that for other population. And this compromises the quality of healthcare you receive at the end. We worked on this problem with Stanford University, and actually this is something that came out recently. Because of this study, Stanford University launched the first skin of color program in its medicine school, because they identified how the academic books in the universities are actually skewed towards a certain segment of population. What are the usual data issues? The previous speaker highlighted how data is critical, the challenge we have about data. And I came across this very interesting piece that is written by Africans, most of them at least. And I do believe the challenge they mentioned about healthcare data could be also applied across different sectors in Africa, not only health. If you think about data collection, whether it's agriculture, education, finance, we often have this problem of incompleteness, fragmented across different sectors and different departments, and they don't even share the data among each other. If you think about curation, the maintenance, the storage, it's always a critical problem. And I have recently started working with Nelson Mandela Foundation in South Africa. They have thousands of records from Nelson Mandela, but still we didn't figure out how we can really digitize that and interact with that data. So management and collection is always a critical problem in data, not only in health data, but also in other sectors. And the recommendations I really like from the authors is the importance of investing on both physical and digital infrastructure, establishing and overseeing the implementation of agile digitalization that could be fed into AI pipeline. When we need to, of course, digitize, then need to standard that so that it's compatible for both the regional ecosystem and then the global ecosystem. But most importantly, even if you are a clinician, a doctor, a lab director, it's critical to, improve the capacity to understand data so that it could be used for such a pipeline. The previous speaker, I was sitting for the last few minutes and he mentioned how global models doesn't work in African context. And this is equally true. I work a lot on what we call geospatial machine learning, which says take satellite imagery and try to map different areas of interest in the ground. And we identified the same. If you just use globally existing models and their products, and this is a proof of concept in Kenya, in Murang'a County, you could see that the land cover maps across different global models is not only wrong compared to the input data you see at the top, but they don't even agree to each other. The first one is Google's Dynamic World, the second one is from European Space Agency, the third one is E3. And what we did is actually let's collect low size but high quality local data in that region. And having our pipeline really improves the granularity of land cover map, as you see in the bottom right. And again, this is just to say, as Professor Wangari Maathai said, local context matter. How do you include that local context is by collecting small, not big. Everyone thinks like big, we need big data for everything. Probably not, if you understand the problem better. And this is like one example of how local context could really give a boost. Again, I don't want to talk about problems only, but how can we consider, how can we understand better data-specific issues? The first one is principled collection effort. What I mean by that, when we collect data at Indaba and in many local events, I always hear about we are collecting data, we are collecting data, we are collecting data. I always argue against collect or start from the amount of data you have, try to identify the gap and trying to improve that gap in your next data collection process. Some ask for the existing data issue, can we use synthetic data? It's very argumentative, but I do think synthetic data could help. In fact, we often, when we train AI models, we do augmentation, right? We augment our data in a different form and shape. I believe synthetic data is also a form of augmentation. But still, it's dependent on the real data that model is trained on. It has its own merit from security, perspective, but also don't forget that the quality of the real data the model is built on still affects the quality of synthetic data you get out of it. Things change on the ground, so it's very important to have a frequent calibration of the data. And in optimistic note, no data is perfect. When I say data is important, I don't mean that get the right data which is perfect, because that doesn't exist. What's key is identify the gap in the data, and there is a chance, as a recent paper in that title, if you even if it's bad data, you could always try to get a good model out of it if you identify the gap and try to come up with a solution. How many of you know survivor bias? 1 hand, 2, 3. So I don't need to explain it more. The idea is this also reinforces the idea of data you have at hand may not exactly reflective of the problem. During the Second World War, I think the American military tried to maximize its success. And one study they did is, let's see the planes that are coming from the war and which part of the plane is damaged. As you see, most of the damage are done across the wings. And what they did is, okay, let's just put in more materials to make the the wing is stronger and so on, which makes the planes bigger and it's difficult to maneuver. But the statistician Abraham Wald say, where are the missing holes? Because these are the planes that came from the war. So that actually, even if you see many holes in the wing, it means that actually this is a less important piece of the plane. What's important is what we don't see in this data, because those planes with the holes in the engine, in the cockpit, they don't come back. So they build their next step on, building the engine and the cockpit because they don't have the data for it, but the data they have is the missingness of what's actually the problem. So when you think about a problem and you have the data, sometimes the actual reflection of the problem is not reflected on the data you have. Similar to this, all the holes you see in the windows are not actually the problem you want to avoid. Those hit in the engine don't come back so that you don't have the data. I need to wrap up and then we go for lunch. When I say problem-driven and data-centric AI from Africa to the world, I do believe it's actually useful and should be the way we see it even for global AI conversation. And a good testimony for that is the type of recognitions as a best paper, distinguished paper awards we received over the years at workshops and symposiums at NeurIPS, at EMEA, HKI, and MIKAI last year. But in addition to that, the way we build AI in Africa is getting more of an attention even from AAAI and HKI in their new tracks like AI for Social Good, AI for Social Impact track. So how I discussed AI as a problem-driven and data-centric process is also getting attentions in those venues. More publication is coming to show how AI conversation in Africa is getting visible into the global community. I think a week or so ago, we published the selected papers from last year in Daba as HKI proceedings. So HKI is a top AI conference, as you know, but they are, publishing now the papers from this Indaba community. And tomorrow, actually, we have a similar conversation which says Responsible AI from Africa workshop. So if you have time, come and join us. And not only HKI, now ACM, Nature, and UN are also interested to bring this conversation into the global stage. I know time is up. I'll just finish with this assignment for all of us. Yesterday in the panel, there was a discussion how we need to reflect on how we do AI in Africa. And I found this quote from Ernesto Ciroli, an Italian Sustainable Development Officer, and his example of a project he did in Namibia long time ago. I call this story Hippo story because it reflects also how AI is being developed and how we should respond to it. In his conversation, he said long time ago when he comes to Zambia, when he was young, he sees Zambezi River. And he said, this is a river, a farm, a fertile ground around. Why don't the people farm, potato, which has, frequently produced and then sell? As a development officer, he doesn't know much the local context, and he pays the people to do the tomato farm. People were not convinced, but they are paid, so they do what they were asked. The tomato farm growing well, and before the harvest, the hippos from the river came and destroyed the whole farm. And Ernesto said, my goodness, the hippo. And the local people said, yeah, we know. And he asked them, why didn't you tell us? And they said, you didn't ask us first. Because as a development, especially as he came, problem, solution, easy, let's go, not aware of the hippo that may come and destroy. Why I am bothering you with this hippo story? It is the same with AI, with different players, non-profits, big techs, governments, coming up with different strategy. We as an African should always ask, not talk, but ask. Is this problem, is it regulation, is it framing really reflective of our local context? If you are building, AI pipelines, if you are doing a master PhD, if you are working in a startup, always ask, is this pipeline reflective of our context? Let's not wait until the hippo came and destroy our farm. Let's ask from the first so that we could build a solution that actually makes a difference for our local challenge. By that, I finish. And if you have questions, happy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We would take only 2 questions, if there are any, so we could quickly go for lunch. Okay, 1 and 2. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful talk, of course. We're an indigenous lab, okay, and I think we do AI for good. We don't use that label, but our projects are to benefit our local environment, and we're certainly the only ones there able to get local data that would meet the kind of criteria you're talking about. But I wake up every morning and I say, what drives AI in the world? And it's, I would say, AI for money. Okay, why have we gotten to where we are? Because there's economic incentive. You look at agriculture, the economic potential of agriculture in Africa is enormous. It could be 50 times what it is today, and AI could drive that. So there's these big economic interests that need the local data and are going to be capable of profiting from it. We've had a lot of discussions this week about this problem. Who gets the data, who creates local data, and do they benefit from that? What is their incentive? Because it looks like it's someone else that's going to profit. I could compare it to cocoa. Côte d'Ivoire harvests practically all the cocoa in the world, and they make almost nothing, but the people that produce chocolate get all the profit. And how do we get around this problem that we're harvesting the data, we're not making chocolate? What's our incentive? Thank you.
Do you want to take the
okay, let me take and then I could address.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much, Girmaw, for a very interesting and thought-provoking presentation. My question goes almost in the same direction, really, but I want to focus a little more on, what you think we can do to harmonize the effort we make here as Africans. For quite a number of years now, we've been working on things like data collection for the works we do, and there are also startups that want to do stuff, and there are different kinds of efforts going on, and they exist in small islands. It looks like we don't harmonize our efforts well. So each time someone starts something, he's creating a new data set. I've been part of efforts to sponsor or fund dataset creations across Africa for different kinds of projects like the ones you showed us here, healthcare, agriculture, language, and so on. But people don't see that. People don't see the models we create. We can't build upon what we've created, and they're just existing here and there. And sometimes other initiatives, including Masakane and others, become like a transit space for people to come in, maybe build their career and move on. We don't seem to keep a good record of what we've done for people to build on top of that and avoid reinventing the wheel. What's your thought? This is what I think is one of the problems we have. Do you think that's the problem? If so, what's your thought on that?
Thank you. Yeah. Back over to you.
Great. Thank you for the questions, really. They support each other, but one also signals as sort of why we have the problem in the first place. Let me start from the cocoa scenario and the need for having and owning local data so that we are the benefiters from that data and what's coming next in the first place. I completely agree. I think the first thing is, as I said, ask. Let's not make it binary. Of course, I always think, what about making the pie bigger? It doesn't mean that you give someone else your data and then you are out. But if we know what we are doing, if we know what we own and what we are capable, always we could negotiate. In fact, I don't have much of a concern about the researchers and people like most of us in this room. When you engage with governments and non-profits working on many problems in the continent, you'll be surprised actually how it's not about another big economic model behind it. Even internally, they don't even share data. It's one ministry, it's one organization, and you talk to them, and someone has a data collected from funding from this organization. Another department has data from funding from that organization in one country, in one ministry, or in one non-profit organization. They don't even share data. So that sharing of the data could have a different abstraction. But first, as I said, that intersectionality is key. Start from what you have and what you are missing. And you always need some people to reinforce your data, to reinforce your capability. And then you talk and you bargain according to what you have. And it should be always, give and take. Because as I said, no one can do it alone. But if you go to the governments, do they have the right understanding even to negotiate on our behalf when putting the regulations, the policies that makes it flow? No. Because first, we don't ask. If we don't ask, we may go into that territory of, giving up all we have without much returning. But again, I'm not, in fact, at even IR for Good Lab, we sort of support like data sharing in a principled way, starting from your local, regional, country-wise, continental, and then we bargain accordingly. For that to happen, definitely we need to have more principled approach. You cannot just lock yourself and say, I have this data, I will not know, because you could reinforce it in more other data sources, more other public data sources, more other industry.
I'm very sure people are on their way from lunch, and as we continue to progress in the workshop, I'm very sure a lot of people would join in. For the sake of time, and also because a lot people could also have some other things they might want to do, we would like to start with the lightning talk. So I'll be inviting Yakub Darian, who would be giving a talk on one size does not fit all, tailoring data annotation pipeline for African languages.
Okay. Thank you for the very few people who are present here. So, is it working? Okay. So my presentation is a little about presenting like new approaches to compiling and annotating datasets actually in Africa, because the main approach that we often mention and most people want to use is obviously crowdsourcing. That actually is not okay. Thank you. That is not actually practical in most situations in African language landscape actually. So the big question is, how do you compile and the datasets could be for speech recognition or any kind of NLP task actually. But how do we use crowdsourcing when we don't have the crowd actually? Because there are many situations where this is just not practical actually, in the sense that, especially in our case, we are trying to compile an ASR dataset for the low resource Bambara language, which is spoken actually in the whole West African region, but there are really few speakers able to write in this language. So sometimes the context that made a language low resource is not the number of speakers, but the literacy actually, the level of literacy of those people. So how do we do crowdsourcing when there is no crowd? Well, we don't actually. So the approach that we have been proposing is to adapt especially the data collection and annotation pipeline to our realities actually, which is the fact that we don't necessarily have to rely on crowdsourcing for annotating our data. So the main moral is that we should avoid actually the dogmatic workflows that most researchers tend to adopt almost systematically in Africa. So crowdsourcing actually assumes literacy, stable orthographies, and a lot of people able to contribute to the data collection and annotation process, which many low resource languages logically don't have actually. Okay. So this is the approach that we have adopted to compile this ASR dataset that I was talking about. This is the Hugging Face ID of the dataset, Robo Mali Kunkado. It is today the largest ASR dataset for Bambara language. So we've been able to compile this dataset by making some very specific decision due to some characteristics of the Bambara language especially. And the first step that we decided to adopt was we are not going to outsource the data collection process itself, in the sense that we are not going to develop any application or anything to really keep control on the collection process. We are just going to try to harness the large amounts of audio that were already available. So we went to the medias and we asked them to open their archive for our research actually, and many accepted. So we could get a lot of data, a lot of unlabeled audio data that we actually, by making this choice, you choose to spend more time in the pre-processing of this data, logically, because you don't have any control on the collection procedure, you don't have any control on the recording setup, for this case specifically, which we are talking about audio. So if you don't have any control on how the audio are recording and what are the topics and all those things, you need to do more filtering of those data. So that's a fair trade-off actually, and it was worth it according to me. So the second step was that in our earliest approach to compiling ASR datasets, actually, we have been doing that for a while now. And in 2022, we released GD-ASR, another ASR datasets, in which we had requested that the annotators do the segmentation of the audios. So we trained them to use the software Elan, and we trained them to actually segment the audios by timestamp. So they would just choose the timestamp that they are going to annotate and put the transcription and validate. Unfortunately, the other things that when your annotators are not actually that used to, not even used, familiar with any kind of technological device or application, that results in additional errors in the procedure, in the sense that we are getting a lot of misaligned audio segments in this dataset especially, because they will sometimes just select timestamps and forget to change the timestamp at some next annotation sometimes. And that's something that is really annoying when you're trying to build an accurate speech recognition model. And in order to fix that, we've been actually decided that we don't necessarily need the segmentation part of the process to be perfect. We could accept any kind of approximate segmentation. So we just decided to use silence detection in order to segment all the audio data that we actually have. And then it's all about reformatting the transcription task itself. In the sense, we don't want anymore that they will segment the audios and transcribe afterward, or as trying to make it as simple as possible actually by reformulating the task as some kind of episodic annotation task. So we will segment the data and deliver it to them, so they will annotate them segment by segment after segments. So making it in this specific pipeline, it's almost impossible to have misaligned audio data with transcription, because they are just transcribing at one audio after another. And the last step that is not actually practical in a lot of situations that we cannot generally apply, it's that actually when we have a pre-trained model that is performing well enough, when you're compiling datasets, we have been talking about the specific case of speech recognition here. And when you are compiling datasets, I noticed that many researchers, and due to the difference between the transcription guidelines, sometimes will just choose to transcribe from scratch. And from the experiments we've been running, actually, I have noticed that even a model with 50% error, so basically the model is making one error at every 2 words in the transcription. And even with those models, the speed gain actually in the transcription part is not neglectable. So it is really important to not neglect that last part. We could, by leveraging those models, actually, we could transform the annotation task into a review task, a first review task, actually. So it's worth it, actually. And okay, so the key takeaways of this approach, and what I want to talk about today, is just that, as we said, one size does not fit all. It's important to tailor your data collection or annotation procedure, or anything that is really relevant and time consuming sometimes, to specific realities, because we won't even get that much data with crowdsourcing actually in many contexts. So the trade over control for quantity was worth it in our case, and I guess it might be the case in many other African languages. So just the key takeaways are, do this trade sometimes, actually. Do this trade of accept to just lose a lot of control on some things like the recording quality, or like the controlling the data distribution itself in order to get more data. Most of the time when you scale the data set, the deep learning models actually, the performance of the deep learning model scale also. So trying to compile very small data sets that are almost perfect is not actually the right way to train deep neural networks. And the last question is, do question the convention sometimes. Like, you're not just applying some conventions that might not fit in some situations. So rethink about what rules do you have to follow, and are they actually suitable for a specific situation? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jakob, for a wonderful presentation. The next presenter would be Daniel, who would be talking on the topic, "The community knows what it wants. Crowd wisdoms in community sensing for datasets."
Hi. Good to be here. Hi, data science. Deep learning in the community. Hi. Yeah. There's a sister organization known as Data Science Africa, which, in tandem, there's been efforts to really push the work on AI and data science in Africa. So, well, my name is Daniel. I'm Tembesa. I'm out of Makere AI Research Lab. And so we were asking this question for a long time, since about 2013. Do you need to have structured data sets or data collection sensing, especially when you're doing crowdsourcing or you're doing community sensing? In other words, you have some agents in the community that are helping you collect the data. And we found or learned the very hard way that the community actually knows what it wants, okay? You just have to be an aid and allowed to be used. So my question and the creator's wisdom that I wanted to share is about what if the best dataset design definitely doesn't come from experts, which now we have learned is true, but from the people where they live with the problem. What really motivated us was we started with agriculture, and we quickly realized that the standard traditional data collection pipelines that with experts, they really have almost like a 60 or less correlation of what is happening on ground, and the sample space usually is too small, and of course they are done infrequently. So we thought about it and we're like, let's see what the community has to say, and we learned very well. Fast forward, we wanted to test that on something that is very pertinent to our respiratory health. This is air quality monitoring. There is a group out of Makere, Uganda, and they build small bread-size air quality monitors, and now they've spread them to 25 African countries. But these monitors, you only can put them in places that have electricity, like a school or a hospital, somewhere that is standard. Okay, if you're going out in another place, like in the densely populated peri-urban areas, you really can't have them there because they include a solar panel, which in many places is more valuable, right? And so we wanted to see the riders. They're a community that go everywhere and anywhere at any time and carry everything. Can they tell us or give us some wisdom? And what we did at first, so this is us and how we deploy. Again, why the riders? It's because they reach everywhere, anywhere, very inexpensive, and you can access them. So we fit them with these small sensors, and we're trying to see if we can use them for this work. What we first did was give them standard routes, like a route, come from here, go here, don't do anything else. And you pay them for their time, their whole day. This turned out to be super expensive, and this is the structure that is required of many standard data collection pipelines, right? This turned out to be super inefficient in terms of cost, and you're spending quite a lot to take them away from their work. And so that's one. Two, the other disadvantage is that when you draw routes for them, and this is just air quality monitoring in mobile sense, you can picture this in any other setting. When you do standard routes for them, you have the same repetition. You don't learn from areas that are outside, and also you don't learn adaptively. So we kept on getting the same results, the same roads that they take, until we decided, what do we really want to achieve? We want to achieve some spatial coverage. And so we were asking, is it possible to achieve spatial coverage beyond the network or beyond the routes that we give them? One. Two, there's something in bold here, and the idea is that you want to maintain these communities that are sensing, but you want them to maintain what they like to do, okay, or the properties they prefer. There are some roads that they don't like to take because they know there's a traffic police guy and they don't have the license, right? But they still want to work for you. There's some roads they know they're super dusty or super muddy, and they want to take another route. So we want to maintain those properties. One of the other properties is that they want to carry other passengers, okay? Take routes that represent some comfortability or some inconvenience, but get paid from both sides. So this is what they want, okay? And so we started designing around this. 3 directions that were pertinent to us. Are we able to safeguard their independence? Are we able to give them privacy and enough motivation? Then are we able to balance their voices? There's heterogeneity even in the crowd that is doing the sensing. Some people don't like to work in the morning, some people like to work in the evening, okay? And then we have a lot of work that we've done to avoid overlap. If somebody has taken a route so many times, the value of that route starts to drop. So, and we quickly thought, okay, we built a network graph for them, where we can do computation on demand. This is what I've done. And then we realized we have to really understand what the objectives are. The sensing center wants maximized coverage. The guys want minimized distance, but all in all, you want some minimized time between point A to point B. And of course, we have constraints that we try and work with. And this is our objective function with the constraints. What we then realize is that from the picture that you saw earlier, this picture of how they were moving, now look at how they move once you start giving them objective functions, of course on an app and motivation. We give them Pareto optimal paths. First of all, we give them choice. We draw 2 routes that are Pareto optimal, taking the objectives and trying to find the best routes that we can. We give them 2 routes, and each of these routes is given some price. So there's a price that varies from one to another. This is our platform where we allow them to choose between the 2 routes, visualize them in between the areas, and in between here they can take whatever directions they want, and they'll still get paid for that. This was within our first month. It looks super disorganized, but they are covering areas that are way out of our scope and way out of our standard routes. By the time we were within the 3rd, 6th month, we couldn't even recognize this anymore. They were collecting data from areas that we don't even have any standard coverage of air quality, okay? And the only thing they need to know is, can I still participate as a community sensor? Can I go to areas? Will I be incentivized? So the right incentives gives you right data. We were able to achieve spatial coverage for the entire city. And now we are receiving interest from Calcutta in India to do the same for them, and also in Bangkok. And so what I really want to envision for this is this mix of technical rigor, okay, and context-aware community sensing. They know what they want. You just have to facilitate them with the right incentives and the right technical setup. So that's my finishing remark. The community knows what it wants. We just have to listen. So thank you, and thank you very, very much. You can reach me on LinkedIn right there.
Okay, without further ado, I will be inviting Melvin, and he will be presenting the topic, Centering African Data in AI, Navigating Ethics, Quality, and Innovation in Local Context.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Melvin Fukam. Today, I will present the topic Centering African Data in AI, Navigating Quality, Ethics, and Innovation in our local context. First of all, it's very important to remind what is artificial intelligence. And as we know, artificial intelligence is one branch of computer science where we try to give the capability to machine to be able to reproduce human intelligence. And as we can notice, in most of African countries, we have different kind of application of artificial intelligence now. We have in finance, in education, in marketing applications, social media, and also. But currently, we are using most of the time generative AI. Like, for example, Gemini to generate some text, some video, some photo also. But when we think about AI in Africa, we can observe that we just have like 75 companies who care about AI. But in Africa, most of us, we are using AI. And we start to think, is it enough, this number of startups thinking about AI in Africa? Because we know we are the most available people to care about our own problem. Okay, we can also observe that digital infrastructure currently in Africa is really growing, and we have different kind of new tools like Starlink, who can improve rural connectivity. We have mobile penetration who can achieve like 50% in 2025 in Africa. We have AI adoption now currently is like about 20% in Africa. the potential of digital technology has been proved to boost productivity. But the question now is it in the context of Africa the same thing? First of all, as we know, when you want to build AI solution, we need to have data. And sometimes we think that the quantity of data can be enough for attacks, but it's very important to know that it depends on the goal of your attacks at the end. Then you will be able to evaluate the quality of data you need. For example, when you want to solve one kind of problem related to AI, you need first to care about diversity. What is the meaning of diversity? It's like, for example, we are in Africa, we want to build tools for African country. You need to care if your data, you have, for example, data from West Africa, for Central Africa, for North Africa, and all this kind of thing can be proved. And we need also to care about representativity. Like, is it all the kind of people we target in our data? For example, if you want solution for education, you can define different kind of level of solution. You can work with high school students. You can care also about university students also. But in our data set, is it all this level representative in your data? You need to care about that. And also, depending on the goal of your attacks, you need to care if the data we collected is really relevant for your attacks. That is a really important thing. You need to care when you want to build a good AI solution. It's not just about the quantity of the data, but it's also about all these elements. And in our context, when we talk about the quality of data, you need to ensure the reliability of this data. For example, in Africa, we need to start to have a structured data ecosystem where we can be able to collect and save all the kind of data we can have in our context. And after that, depending on the goal you want to achieve with your AI solution, you can go there and try to download the requirement data you need for your solution. And also, you need to care about the relevance of the data. Is it data relevant for your stacks? And you need also to make sure that all the community is involved in your solution. But the question can be, is having the data enough? The answer can be no, because sometimes you can have data, but you are not able to interpret or to give some insight about this data. You need some time to care about another thing. That is why it's relevant to think about ethics. When you think about ethics, it's really relevant when you want to build AI solution to think about human understanding. For example, when you are in when you want to build solution, you are scientists. You need to start to think also about the people who use your solution. Like, is it relevant for the culture of these people? Is it relevant for the region of these people? You don't just need to care about the performance of your model, but you need also to care about the interpretability, the ethics of your model. And that is why most of the time we recommend to use block taxonomy. That is one tool can help you to really make sure that your pipeline is really relevant for your solution, because you need to care about all the steps to build your solution and make sure that at all these steps you make ethics really relevant for your solution. For example, it's also important to remind that AI tools can be seen like a black box where you have maybe something is happening inside, but you don't know how it's going. Then for that, it's really important most of the time that you don't trust all the output of AI solution. You need some time to make sure that the output is fitting to what is supposed to be. That is why sometimes you have the kind of new AI's branch called explainable AI, where we suppose before giving some output to give why you give this output. But for example, in a specific case, you want to deliver a solution for a farmer in Africa or for one specific country. The first thing you're supposed to do is to start to collect the data. Which data is relevant for your solution? After, you need to start to think about which AI tools you will use to solve your problem. In my case, for example, is one credit scoring application. That means I need to find one algorithm in AI field to be able to do this task. And after, when you build your solution, you need to think how it's relevant for your community. How will we help your community? That is why, as I said, when I am building AI-driven credit scoring, is to help, for example, farmer to really get money quickly, because most of the time, the traditional process makes time. That is why we need this kind of tool to help farmer with finance, skill, and resilience in their works. That's, for example, the demo for one kind of application relevant for our context. You need also to care about the culture. That's why you can see this woman is really close to African people, because sometimes when you go to use some application, you see other face, you can say, oh no, that is not for us. That is why before you think your application, you also care about the design that is relevant to put it in our solution. Thank you. I think that is the end of my presentation. If you have some question, I am available to answer you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. And yeah, you can. Our final presenter will be Joy Victor, who will be talking on the topic, who owns African data, cyber threats, and the fight for digital sovereignty. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'll be talking on who owns African data, cyber threats, and the fight for digital sovereignty. My name is Joy Victor. I'm a data and research analyst at Data edX Group with a focus on AI ethics. But before I go into my talk today, I just want to have a quick poll. So I would like you to raise your hands if any of these three things has happened to you before. The first is, have you ever received an email, a phone call, or an SMS saying that from someone that you know 100% you did not give them your details, either a person or your company, you never gave them your details, but somehow you got a message from them? Thank you. That's a lot of hands. And if anyone here, you've probably also seen maybe a link or something and you were like, this is so sus, I'm very sure this person is about to scam me. Have you ever seen something like that before? Great. And then this one, I hope hasn't happened to anybody, but your social media or your bank account has been hacked before, unfortunately. Oh, I'm so sorry. So now these are all security incidents that have happened to us, which means I'm talking to the right audience today. And there have been some really public security incidents that have happened in Africa in the past year that are really sensitive, and we should all be talking about them. The first is South Africa's government employees pension fund that was attacked by the Lockbit ransomware gang. And basically what Lockbit does is they run a ransomware as a service where they share ransomware, where they actually sell ransomware to bad actors, and they use it to encrypt victims' data, and they get a percentage of whatever cuts they get from the ransom. That's a pretty neat business model if that wasn't a crime. And next is Nigeria's Minister of Communications and Digital Economy, Bosun Tijani, where his national identification number was bought for 100 naira. This is one of the most powerful men in Africa's technology space right now, and the equivalent of his social security number was bought for just 7 cents. These are very disturbing issues that show that there is a very serious need for better data security in Africa, because our current infrastructures have loopholes, they are old, we also have weak government policies, low financial and equipment investment, and a greater need for technical expertise. And according to the Interpol's Africa Cyber Threat Report, African economies are becoming more digitized. We're embracing technology more, and we are becoming a bigger target for online scams, business email compromise, ransomware, DDoS attacks, identity theft, misinformation, and also manipulation. And with AI on the scene, cybercrime is worsening. For example, we have AI-generated deepfakes. I've gotten tired of the amount of times I've had to tell my mom, this image is not real. Because every time she sees something, she just believes it. And I have to educate her over and over again that these are not exactly true. And we have more sophisticated phishing attacks, disinformation campaigns, and a rise of turnkey attacks as well. So now, what has this cost Africa? Yearly, we lose about $4 billion to cybercrime. And this just clearly shows that African data is being targeted and commodified. And despite this, 65% of African countries have still not updated their cybercrime legislation in the past year. So if in the unfortunate incident that someone uses deepfake to actually impersonate you, chances are the legislation of your country does not protect you in that specific regard. So what are the proactive steps we can take to move forward? Because as Africa continues to make giant strides in the AI race, it is pertinent that we do not forget to protect the data behind our models. And we all know that the data that is used to train models sometimes contain personal information that could be health data or financial data, and this could lead to losses in several degrees. So the proactive steps we can take moving forward include strengthening operational, technical, and institutional capacity of cybercrime units across all levels. We can also enhance legal and policy frameworks across all African countries. We can improve regional and international cooperation as well. And next, we can expand public awareness of data literacy and security like we're doing today. And like we can also keep telling our parents on how they can be better security conscious. And we can also leverage existing and emerging technologies for crime prevention, like automation, secure cloud services, and AI. And finally, I want us all to know today that we are indeed in a data protection crisis, and this fight is critical to Africa's AI future. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Joy, for the wonderful presentation. Now we will be moving on from the lightning talks. Thanks to all the presenters and to all the works that were selected to be presented here today. We will be bringing on Jessica Hujo, who is going to be the moderator for the panel session we are going to have, and she's going to introduce each of the panelists. Jessica is a research student at McGill University in Canada, and she is also a member of the Miller Institute in Canada and also a research engineer at Lelapa AI. Who is it? I'm proud to be a colleague because we both work at Lelapa. Yeah, Jessica, let's have you.
Hello, everybody. How are we feeling? So in the last session of the program, and throughout this workshop, we've learned from our speakers, we've learned from ourselves in the breakout sessions. So this time we want to learn from people that have a ton of experiences and the data space in the African AI space. So first of all, I'll be introducing Vukosi. Vukosi is a professor of computer science in the University of Pretoria. Is the co-founder of the Lapa AI, Deep Learning in Indaba, and Mastercard NLP. He has done a lot of work in the African AI space, and we're happy to have him in this panel. Okay, so next up, I will be introducing Felecia Webb. She's the Chief Strategy Officer at Partnership on African AI, on AI generally. She does a lot of philanthropy and public policy and equity advocacy, and we're happy to have her here also. Okay. Next up, I'll be introducing Albert Kahira. Albert Kahira has been a data quality officer for over 10 years at Lacuna Fund. Lacuna Fund is an organization that has been invested in creating data for African languages for a lot of applications. So happy to have him here also. Okay, and finally, we're going to have our co-organizer of this workshop, Chris Emezue. He is a founder of Lanfika. Lanfika is an organization that is collecting African resources into one place. He's also a researcher at MIDA. We're happy to have him here. Okay. So before we go into the questions and into picking your brains, we want you to share a bit about yourself and to tell us how your experiences as connected to data in Africa.
Oh, okay. For me, I'll be short. I'm Vukosi. That's that's enough for this one. But in terms of data, my background before was working in a data science team in a government lab, and through that experience, really got to understand the challenges, what we call data flow. So data flow is that data is created somewhere, and then on the other side, whether you're a researcher, a developer, whatever, you might want to get access to that data, and unfortunately, it does not flow. And that normally is an indication that there's a lot of other background challenges, whether it's governance issues, technical setups, that things are not put in the right places, ... in those ways. So this experience for me became very useful when I was accelerating my and my team's work in working on natural language processing and moving to to a university where now when you look at a problem where there's no data, data doesn't exist, you don't just think about can I create the data, but you then also think this data probably exists somewhere, and how do I make sure it flows? Right, so that is the thing. So you have to think very creatively. So I tend to work in that way, that I take that my work as a data scientist working in a government entity helped a lot in the way that I actually deal with data, even if it's for natural language processing today.
Hello, I'm Felecia Webb, and I'm actually from New York, and Partnership on AI is a US-based nonprofit organization that's global. We have about 140 partners across 16 countries, Africa being a priority country for us as an organization. My journey on how I came into the space of AI and how to be here in Africa with all of you is that I come from corporate philanthropy, and everything was data-driven decision-making. And for me, I look at data, it's people. When we talk about data, we're talking about people. And so I really do everything in a people-centered way and a data-driven way. And so as we know that can be biased, it can be disproportionately unfair and impact communities that will continue to strive and struggle to have equality and equity. So that is my work's passion. So I come from cause marketing to how we can rally the cause to put it in the hands of the people. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for having us.
Hi everyone, my name is Albert. I'm from Kenya. I was introduced earlier. But I think you made a mistake by saying I've worked for Lacuna Fund for 10 years. No, that's not 10 years. That's what other years. Yeah, no. That's 3 years. I think 4 years. Yeah. So I did Lacuna Fund for 4 years. So I'm a computer scientist, computer engineer by training. So by default, I interacted with data just by virtue of being in a computer science classroom. But my background is actually like my PhD, and a lot of the research work I've done is in high performance computing, right? And high performance computing is essentially supercomputers that are super good at crunching data and whatnot. So good so that if you look at the anatomy of a supercomputer, you have what we call the login nodes, you have what we call the compute nodes, but you have something we call the data nodes. And this is where a lot of the data is stored. And then you have that flow coming in from the data nodes to the compute nodes for the computation and all that. So that's kind of what I did my PhD in, just trying to look at the different aspect of scaling machine learning workflows in supercomputers. But one of the things I noticed earlier on in my PhD was a lot of the data that I was working on was not coming from the continent, right? So pretty much anything I wanted to do, even if it's develop workflows or whatever, yes, I was not doing my PhD in Africa, but I would have loved to engage data from the continent, right? And that was not there. So I started thinking a lot about this. And when I finished my PhD, when I was doing my postdoc, I started working with Lacuna Fund as a data quality advisor. And my role there was just to look at all this enormous effort that was going on to create data sets in the continent and to ask ourselves, how can we do better in terms of creating these data sets? So I was working with Lacuna Fund for about 3-4 years, coming up with new ways of producing better quality data and supporting the grantees who are creating all the data and that kind of thing. And so that's kind of like my engagement with data.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris. Sorry, I'm not going to be very loud because it's been interestingly tiring organizing the workshop. But I will say, I'm Chris. I'm involved in a number of things because I care about my African continent. I care about my languages. I will talk about how I'm involved with Landfricker. At Miller, I'm a researcher. At Landfricker, I'm doing something quite different. So I'm a young researcher, studied mathematics, and I've always had this dream where I want us to be able to talk and communicate in our native languages freely. I want to be able to send, I lived in Nigeria, which has over 500 languages. I came up from a country that is so linguistically diverse, and historically, this diversity is seen as a source of disunity and a problem. So I've always had this ambition to create a world where unity in diversity, where the diverse language, diverse culture is actually a source of strength. And I believe that to do that, we need to enable seamless communication in these diverse languages. So I had this dream where I could talk to my WhatsApp in maybe English or in my native language, and the other person could hear it in their native language. And these were some of the young dreams I had when I was still a young student learning mathematics. And this is what brought me into AI, into NLP, into Masakani, and doing different things. Along the way, I then, I started with like the modeling and the mathematics, and then I moved into the data because I then realized that majority of the setbacks that we're facing could be tied around the data. And one of the major setbacks that I found as a researcher was it's just really difficult to find African data sets. It's very difficult. We don't have a good understanding of the state, the landscape of things, where things are, where the data sets are. So like if I ask you, whatever native language you speak, how many hours of speech data sets exist for your language? Like, do you know? And you probably don't know, but where would you go to know this? If you want to know how many languages in the world, you go to Ethnologue. If you want to know about Barack Obama or about someone, you go to Wikipedia. But where do you go to if you want to know about the African AI resources and you want to get an understanding about how many hours exist, how many texts exist, which ones don't we have? We don't have that place. So I noticed this gap, and I realized that it's very critical to a lot of the infrastructure we're building, because without that, funders don't know where the critical gaps are. Policymakers don't know where to put more effort in. Researchers and developers face a lot of setback, like Vukosi said, the flow creates a lot of setback in innovation. So at Landfricker, as an organization and a community, we're really trying to improve the public understanding of African AI resources. And this is what brings me down to data and how sort of the work I'm doing now connects with data.
Thank you for that. These are all very important work that drive the state of African AI and data in general. And like you mentioned, a lot of the resources are scattered. And also the way we create data is quite fragmented. There is not a standardized way or some sort of common factors around that. So I want to ask you, first of all, do we need a shared standardized way of creating data? Would that, is there more benefit to that than disadvantage? And how can we design this without losing local context?
Okay, thank you. So the question was, do we need a standardized way of creating data? Yeah. Short answer is I don't know. The long answer is from my experience, so I've spent quite some time creating data sets with communities, and we've also seen lightning talks where the speakers are creating data sets. I love one of them, the community knows what it wants. All right. So I've seen that if we're trying to get standardization has its advantages. It's very good from an optimization point of view and efficiency. But I think the way we approach standardization needs to be different from the typical way we see standardization being done. So for example, in the global north, standardization is all things should have one format. But what if in a place very complex and diverse like the African continent, perhaps it's not about trying to make everything have one format, but maybe having something that can adapt to different formats of different things. So my point about whether we need standardization is really about how we approach standardization when we talk of data in African
AI. For better or for worse, I'm advocate for CSV. Right? It's really just about finding of what are kind of the norms in a specific area, and if you then don't find that there's a norm, what is the thing that makes sense for your process? I wouldn't necessarily want to to say, okay, let's overburden everybody. There's reasons typically where there's a norm that shows up in a field to say this is the interchange. Not saying people might be wrong, that happens, and that's why we keep on, for a lot of, especially tabular data, we keep on going back to CSV of saying it has no opinion, it has nothing, it's just put it in there and then be able to store it. But I think the other thing to think about is just as you're building your data or you're curating data, have the end in mind. Where do you want that data to end up? Do you want it to end up on your laptop that might stop working one day? Do you want it to be in a desktop that the hard drive is going to stop working the next day? Or it must be in a space where it's findable, all the FAIR principles, it can be replicated when it needs to, and then it meets your requirements. Does it need to be behind some access restriction? All of those things, think about them at the beginning, because it allows you, as you're going, you're trying to think about where to put things. So I'll give an example with some data sets we'll talk about tomorrow at the Voices workshop on the language one, where here it's about ASR data. So the funny thing in terms of now standardization, sure, there's lots of ways people store ASR data. And then there's ways that also, like Hugging Face, might enable you to present it in such a way that Hugging Face can ingest it. So what Hugging Face did is that you could either store it in whichever format that you want, and then have a programmed layer that then converts your data into the format that Hugging Face can then pull out. But then you store it in the way that you believe is the best one, but Hugging Face can do. And I remember when we started and we tried to think about the end in mind, the one thing that became is that every area, so it's South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, we figured out that the estimate is that each of the sites is going to generate 1 terabyte of data. Okay, on your computer, or on your own storage, 1 terabyte is not a lot. For the people who are storing on public free services, it became a very weird, people not responding to our emails when we asked, can we put 1 terabyte on your server? And that's the thing that now starts coming up to us and saying, kind of telling you, oh, what's the format? What are we going to have to do? And things. And then shout out to Hugging Face. I know I'm like making it worse because they said they'll look the other way. Just keep on uploading until it, because they do have a fair, they have a fair use limit. And they said like, yeah, you're not paying and we'll allow you to keep on uploading and we'll kind of look the other way because we believe that the data set is useful. Right, but then it came with like, that thing of like, because we thought of it took us like months ago, we already were engaged before we have actually even started having the data coming in.
On that, because we do a lot of work with Hugging Face, and I just want to say in terms of that question around should we have some sort of standards, and I think Hugging Face is probably one of our best partners in terms of doing ethically sourced and data cleaning of their content, and so without standards that you can build on, not to say the standard is the ceiling, it's the base where you start. That you have to start somewhere where you know that data is responsibly sourced, that it's ethically managed, and you think about the entire life cycle of data, right? You have to think of the data enrichment workers on the back end of that. You have to think of where this, how they captured that data, if it was fairly done. So I'm in favor of it. And as we know, the African Union, Smart Africa, they're also trying to look at guidelines around this as governance. In addition to, you want to have data that's going to be usable and accessible by others, because that's how you're going to be able to scale up your products if other standards don't align with your standards. So you have to think about the interoperability.
Do we have any funders in the room? I'm curious. No? Okay. Quite surprised there are no any funders in the room. So I don't really think we should get into the nitty-gritty details of when it comes to standards, that is, like what format you use and whatnot. However, I do think we need guidelines, right? One of the first things we did when I joined Lacuna Fund was we realized Lacuna Fund had run about 3 RFPs or something like that, and actually that's why we were called in. And then the 3 RFPs, that's about, maybe there were about 15, 20 data sets created. But if you ask anyone where those data were, nobody had any idea, right? Somewhere in Google Drive somewhere, in another OneDrive somewhere, and in another place somewhere. And if we asked, can we actually use these data sets, right? We realized we couldn't, right? Because, for example, let's say you were collecting classification data, right? We all know that you need to put it in, let's say you have 10 items of classification, you need to put it in 10 different folders, right? But we know that's not the first step in data collection. You just gather everything, and then you will do your classification and sorting and organizing it later. And so one of the first things we did was create guidelines for data set collection and data set creation, right? And this outlined things like, and I said this in the morning, right? Data collection is a science, and you have to approach it as such, right? There's a methodology, there is a how you do things, and all that kind of thing. So one of the first things we did was create those guidelines so that people can know if you're funded by Lacuna Fund to create a data set, even from your proposal itself, the methodology and the items you're expecting, the formats, where you're going to upload that data, the accessibility, the hosting platform, and all that is designed from the word go. Right? So that you don't come later and then we're asking, okay, we need to do an impact assessment. Where are these data sets? Nobody has any idea. And so that's how I think about it. I don't think we need to tell people you have to use CSSV or you have to use JSON or XML or whatever. But I think we need to have, from a funding or from like a research perspective, very clear guidelines. Like, this is expected. The data should be in a format that is interoperable, like Vukosi said. So that's a CSV, right? Essentially, that's what you're translating to, right? And the data set should be in an accessible place, right? And then the data set should be easy to use. And the reason why a lot of people use Hugging Face is just because of how easy to use it is. There is one Python line of code to pull a humongous data set from Hugging Face, just one line of code, right? So we need to think about those kind of things. And I think those go to the guidelines rather than what we were talking about, like frameworks and details. Yeah.
Yeah, I do agree with us a lot. We do need frameworks and we do need guidelines to guide how we are collecting data and how we are creating data sets. Because in so many ways, that also affects the quality of the data that we're gathering. So that brings me to my next question. How do we ensure data quality? Anyone can go.
Yeah, I think it's still contextual. It's like it's always going to be in that way. What's a way I can think about this? So I'm gonna go over like maybe also pick up a pet peeve in language. So one of the things I've come to discover, for example, which might be practice, tradition across language. Maybe it's only in South Africa, but I suspect there might be in lots of places across not just the continent, but the world. Again, what was the data collected for? So there's people who might have done studies in linguistics, and they literally, in the 80s and the 90s, were doing tape and recording tape. And because on the other side of saying, not thinking about what is an archive going into the future, we don't think about the things that Albert was saying. Like these things of like, where is this thing going to be findable? Where is it going to be accessible? And all those parts. And there might be other reasons as well. There are things of the way people might practice that for them, it's as if I've created a data set, it's really mine until like I literally die. So I don't want, I might not want it to be completely publicly accessible. Even if, like, depending on where you are, everybody must understand for this. Please understand, if you're working at a university somewhere, understand how they deal with how you share either artifacts of the research that you do or what they do, because it's a very important thing. Because if they say, oh, it belongs to the university, some of you might be in countries where they say, if you're funded, especially by the government, there is actually a requirement that the data you create during research must be findable, accessible anytime. So that's just a little star into whatever I'm saying. So now, the reason I'm using tape as something that seems odd is that today, how many people here have a tape recorder or tape player? Right? So when they were like now thinking at that period of, oh, that's going to be the format that I put something in, now it becomes that the quality is going to degrade over time. So I'm telling you now, we have linguistic resources all across the African continent that are rotting away. And there's a part where now, over time, it's almost like you have to think about, there's the beginning of the snapshot that you have of your data, and there's likely going to be periodic maintenance that has to come in over time. Whether that is, I'm not saying anything about Hugging Face. Let's say Hugging Face announced tomorrow that they've run out of VC funding. I'm pretty sure the Indaba would stop and we would all be sitting and saying, let's figure out how to download everything. Am I wrong? Yeah. No. All right? And because there's this part of them, so that's the thing. Like, so think about it in the back of your head. In terms of, to keep the quality, it is not, yes, it's like there's one part of the quality at the snapshot. How good, but then there is also this maintenance that still has to go on. And sometimes it's hard. I sometimes get like these GitHub requests of weird data sets I created 7 years ago. And then somebody adds some notes about some complaints and I'm like, I don't even remember, like, all the things. And now you're asked, and that is the part. So how do we figure out those kind of things becomes a question. And that's the thing in terms of the quality of maybe the medium. Maybe let me say that, as opposed to the data set itself. I think it's data sets are created for a specific reason at a specific time. That might, after a while, if you want to change it to something else, there's still going to be work. There's always energy you have to put in to get it into the thing. But then in terms of now the maintenance of the medium, that is something also that I find is still a concern. So we all might think Hugging Face is forever. That's not true. We're hoping Zenodo is forever, but the LHC might come back tomorrow and say things have happened and no more Zenodo.
Okay, so one more person. Yeah. You want to go?
Anyway, I think sometimes we need to think about life after Zenodo or life after Hugging Face. Is there even going to be life after Hugging Face? But coming back to data quality, it's also something we talked about this morning a lot. So there is something that has happened in Africa in the last 10 years, right? All of a sudden, when this data collection craze started, right, a lot of money came into the continent. There was a lot of people working on data set, and we thank Masakane for getting that work started in terms of creating data sets and whatever. And then we had a lot of money coming in, and a lot of people now really going into the work. Not even money, but sometimes you just, by money I mean even personal effort, right? People putting in a personal effort to create data sets. But we were really playing catch up, right? That's when we were talking about there is not a single African language that is considered like a high resource language, right? Remember in 2019 or 2018, when we were saying there is not one African language that is considered a high resource language. Well, now we don't say that anymore because we have Kiswahili that has changed that. I think Hausa is almost also no longer considered a low resource language and whatnot. But what happened is we went on a huge craze to create data sets and to catch up with the rest of the world. And the question we were asking ourselves in the morning there was, should we take a moment to step and look back at the quality of the data sets we created in an effort to catch up with the rest of the world, right? And we were sitting with one of the Hausa data creators and he said, I think someone did an audit and realized that about 40% of a particular data set in Hausa needs correction, right? And why is that? It's because we really had a very short time to catch up with the rest of the world. And so we went on this craze to create the data, which I think is really good. And communities like Masakane helped us get there. But I think it's time now in terms of data quality to take a moment and maybe go back to the science. Like I said, data collection is a science. Go back to the science, look at what we're doing, and think, moving forward, how do we want our data collection process to look like? How do we want the new RFPs for data collection to look like? What data collection mechanisms, what data quality and data quality assurance mechanisms are we going to put in place as we go the next phase now of data collection?
I think maybe to add quickly to that, for people here who are creating data sets, it is okay to tell people you don't know and ask for help. And this is a part, like every time you start a project and you might be especially moving into maybe a new medium or a new area, finding out what other people have done in the same way. Now go to the person who was doing the audit of the Hausa data set. That information becomes very, very useful and it builds on. And maybe it's like also another one, not to take it as very like outside. I was on Lacuna Fund steering committee, so not to take it as being overly pessimistic. As you develop, you're always going to iterate. We learn. It's only if we fail to learn from what mistakes we've made, that's when we've completely failed. But then if we know that, on phase one, this is what happened, these were some of the mistakes, phase two, we improve a bit, there will still be things that people point out, and over, the quality keeps on improving over that period. So just don't be afraid. Sometimes you go like, I don't want to talk to another researcher because now they'll find out what I'm working on. But it's a very important thing to just be able to ask and say, can you let me know how, like what was your experience? What are the things that you wish you might have done differently in those spaces? So yeah.
I want to add something. So I want to approach data quality from the curation point of view. So you talked about data quality and looking at the maintenance after it's been done. Drawing on experience creating Niger Voices data set. So Niger Voices was 1,800 hours, 3 Nigerian languages, but more surprisingly 5,000 unique voices. I think, and so when you are creating large data sets, I believe it's very important to define quality. I think we have this idea of quality, and if we just jump into creating, it leads to a very not well-informed data creation when you don't take a step back to define quality. I think quality, even in the African context, has some nuances. For example, there's a general idea of quality if you're building speech data, like, okay, there should be a noise signal to noise ratio, background noise stuff. But the data that we're creating, the reason why we even say we want quality is really because we want the AI that's developed to be used in real world situations. So we have to also think about quality from the point of view of, I want my data to be representative of the distribution of real world situations. So if you're trying to do ASR data set and you're saying quality means no background noise, and you are writing guidelines, thou shall not be no background noise, and then you have a very clean data set, 500 hours, well, good luck. But the model that you're going to train can never be used with the motorman in Kigali, because in the real world situation, there's noise, there are all these things going around. And in True Speech with Toby have noticed that most of the models and data sets and models trained on the data sets do not function in real world hospitals. And we've seen, working with them, we've seen that we have to go back to the drawing board of the data that we've created and how we create new data. With Niger Voices, we really took time to think about quality. And I think for different cases, the application you're building, it is contextual what quality means. Quality could be, I want it to be more cultural. So you could say, okay, the data set that we have right now is just Western based, and I want data that has more of the the geographical. So maybe I want data that has more about the things happening in Rwanda versus data set about Barack Obama. So you want that culture angle. You could say, okay, I want quality to be a trade-off between the background noise and between something else. So my experience with especially creating large data sets on the African continent, given the African diversity, is that it's very important to take time to define quality. The other reason why it's important is because Nigeria has 500 languages. We did 3 languages, 5,000 people. There are different ways 5,000 people speak. If you take a language, there's the L1 speaker of the language, there's the L2 speaker of the language, and there are different ways they speak. And if you say, okay, let's define quality, I've seen many quality attempts moving more towards standardized, like it must be this way. This is the right way to say this in my language, and any other way, you're wrong. And so if you now follow that one framework and you create your data set for just that one way, what happens? You're excluding the other people who say things in different ways. So when we were creating the data set, we found that in the room where we're defining quality, we had to add L1 speakers, but also L2 speakers, because they would tell you, okay, growing up learning this language, we also communicate like this and this way. And the L1 we say, okay, this is the original way of saying it. And when you're creating a large data set, you really want to include those diverse ways of communicating in that language.
I just want to add, going back to, yes, the point of what defines quality, and that goes back to the earlier question of standards. But to Vukosi's point, it's about the transparency around the data, documentation when there are comments and how you've gone back to correct that. And then it builds trust. And you build the trust of the subjects that you collected the data from. You build the trust of the people that you give that data to, and you build the trust of the organizations and companies that use that data. So I just want to use that lens. It's like, if those are very real words that are going into policy and guidelines, so you need to normalize that thought process.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And I'm going to summarize it this way. Data quality is in several dimensions. It is at the beginning, where you're defining what quality is in the data creation process. So you don't just identify a problem and gather data. You actually try to figure out how can we gather good data of good quality to solve the problems that we want to solve, and what in our pipelines can ensure this data quality. For example, we used to do this thing where we have multiple reviews of sentences. So you have someone creating the data and like 3 to 4 people reviewing it to see that it is good quality. Although it's more expensive to ensure good quality, but it's necessary. So you have data quality in the beginning, data quality at the end, where you have to look back at things, and data quality over time. Okay. Well, we've talked about uploading our data in places where it is easily accessible, like open source, like Organ Phase. But in so many ways, that limits the control we have over the data. It limits who uses the data, how it's being used, if it's going to be used for good purposes or for harmful purposes, and if it's going to be used to benefit the community. How can we address
that? Sure. I think. All right. So, I think this goes back on one part. So I'll look at. Everybody will hear me this whole year. It doesn't matter where. Licensing as an instrument. Right. So what that means is that there's data that we want to always be openly available, accessible, and then instead of putting kind of gating in very heavy ways, we say licensing becomes my instrument that I use, and this requires a couple of things, I think. So why licensing? So if I have my data, it's there. You can download all of it at any time. But now it has a license that's connected to it, and the license tells you this is what you can and cannot do, where, how, with who. it then, yes, on the one side puts up that those licenses are only as strong as they're enforceable, meaning that you are now going to need lawyers, right? And this is maybe if there were funders in here or people here, it's almost like for this at the beginning, you need to kind of put together a legal fund, a defense fund, to say when somebody finds that something has been done with their data and they were not supposed to, now you can actually hire somebody and then go and actually now pursue this situation. Over time, it becomes again a norm, right? That's why people then say, like, okay, no, I shouldn't do that. I should read what has been said. That's why you find with very large companies, if you collaborate with very large companies and you say, I'm bringing a data set, they will send you lots of questions and say, like, can you tell us who gave you this data set? Can you send us the license information, because we won't touch it if for specific, like, specific things. Other side, people go like, oh, but licensing might stop like people using a data set. No. If you are going against the thing, you can always go and contact the person who created the data set and say, can we have a conversation about me getting access for this reason and this reason? And you have a conversation. It doesn't stop it, right, on that way. And then normally, like, think about the institutions where you're from, how they deal, again, with the life cycle going into the future. On the other side, which is maybe a question I want to have here, if there's anybody, has anybody found their data set in a popular LLM? No. You like I'm being very serious because I'm trying to run some queries later today. Like, has anybody yet found that a popular LLM, you put in some information and then it actually recreates parts of your data set? You like how the New York Times did it is that they could actually do the almost autocomplete of sections of their articles. So maybe now, here we go, we can have a whole experiment in this room, given how many people. Let me know if you try something later today and you find something, let me know tomorrow or later today. Send me a message. I'll be very interested in this because that goes, I think, to the heart of Jessica's question, right? There might be these things that people did not expect would be done with their data sets, and then now this is happening, and now you're asking yourself, what next?
I can add to that. One thing we've seen is, let's say there's a popular LLM that couldn't do well in a language, and then you created the data set, like maybe over 2-3 years, created a data set for that language, and then you then see that the next iteration of that LLM can now do well in that language, and you were the only community that created most of the data sets. So that's maybe a proxy.
So I think it goes like, now we're literally going like, was that your expectation? Is that what you wanted? Or did you want, especially, like sometimes we're not talking about, people must be paid. Did they acknowledge you? Like, I don't know. You see, that is the part here. Like, people might want just that acknowledgement that my work is part of this.
It's so interesting. Cisco just released a report, and they said how Africa is less than 3% of global AI development technology. But given the rich data that's in Africa, and how it could potentially grow to increase the GDP by 3% by 2030. So the data, the people of Africa has value. And I think there should be some value sharing that goes on. And it goes on with the folks collecting that data locally and how they can have their own local sovereignty as well as governmental, like regional sovereignty and continental sovereignty over that data, because that is going to be the key that's going to unlock the resources for the country and for the folks in general. So I feel if we say it's really for AI for public good, going back to what the AU commissioner said earlier about how Africa has to lead, technically and strategically and ethically around how that happens. So that is shared prosperity.
I just want to add something here when it comes to I mean, I love Vukosi's point on licensing and all that, and I know they're quite really good researchers from the continent handling this. Right now, I think we have Professor Njoroge at University of Pretoria and Dr. Melissa in Kenya and all that are really looking into how we can benefit from this. But I want to go back to a different angle to this. And I was at MozFest last year in Zambia, preaching to whoever is willing to listen that we really need to start taking data sovereignty seriously, right? I think most of you are aware that one day people woke up and there was no more USAID, right? And I don't know Kenyans in the room are aware of this. There has been rumors that some of our data was being managed under a certain program, and then all of a sudden you don't have access to that, right? And so one of the things I've been advocating for is data sovereignty. The data needs to live in the continent, right? And someone said a couple of days ago in an internet forum somewhere, and I'm quoting them here, I don't know exactly their name, but I'm quoting them here, that every megabit of data that stays in the continent grows our economies. And to add on what she was just saying shortly, right? Every megabit of data that is staying in our continent is growing our economies. And these are not my words, so don't quote me on that. It's someone else who said these words in an internet forum. So we need to think about that, right? So that even how we access and how we manage the data, we can know what we're doing. I'll give you a very good example. I was giving a workshop one day in Kenya where there were police officers like DCI, criminal prosecution and prosecutors and whatnot. And it was about technology facilitated gender-based violence and how people will upload a photo somewhere and whatever. And the police officer was saying, as long as this is not within our servers, we have almost no control on what we can do, right? So you file a case and you say, my photos have been uploaded on a particular website against my wish. And you go to the police. Yes, the police have to take action, but they tell you, as long as this is outside our borders, there's very little we can do. And so that's just one, that's the bad side of things, right? But on the good side of things, we need a lot of our data to be living within the continent because that's going to help grow our economies. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Before we continue, I'm going to say that I would open the floor soon for questions. So please prepare your questions, and we won't be able to take a lot of questions, unfortunately. Okay.
Yeah, just woken up by Albert there. Just for everybody here, okay, I'm hoping today all of the contracting is done by the end of this day. But yeah, because of what happened to USAID, for people who don't know, Lacuna Fund has, because Meridian has shut down, so Lacuna Fund has ended. So one of the things is that we didn't want to have the repeat of what happened with USAID, especially figuring out where the linking and everything is. So I just want to let you know that we are taking over at the University of Pretoria. We're taking over the assets of like the website. So there will be by hopefully this afternoon, like later this evening, a mirror that's available of the Lacuna Fund website, even though the Lacuna Fund website does, but it's just that we need to make sure people can copy it. And very soon you will be able to also access the GitHub. You can fork it, you can move it wherever you want, you will have it. And with a couple of volunteers, including some internal people inside GIZ, and hopefully many of you, we still have like 16 Lacuna Fund datasets that still have to come back publicly. There will be, as part of that mirror, a link to a place where all of those are, and we're hoping places like Africa will also just, again, make a copy and upload into their databases and so that we can link to all the places that these data sets are so that they're easy to find in a way. So that's been one thing over that. I think actually I have a picture very weirdly being in Nairobi in a basement of a shopping mall 3 weeks ago, fighting with Safaricom because I couldn't download. I got an email saying that the website has been backed up. Download now before the thing. And I was sitting there with Aisha from Google Research, and she took a picture for history of actually us having on my phone. So that's a big thing that unfortunately we now have to do.
Oh, well, okay. That's really good to know that as his efforts are being made in such a way that we can control our data a lot more. Now, it's interesting that we talked about fair use and how our data is growing other people's economy, because a lot of the people that do create this data are being exploited. There's been instances of exploitation, there have been instances of working in unfavorable conditions, and it feels like the government is not looking at this. It feels like a lot of the policies that are being made are made for after data has been created. how can we better protect ourselves?
Yeah, definitely. We have at Partnership on AI, actually, we've done a lot of research on data enrichment workers and gig workers and the conditions that they work under, and have been pushing and advocating that along the value chain that responsible AI sourcing is a part of curation for a procurement for organizations. And so we're asking that those be included in standards for labor rights, and that they make those considerations when they actually procure data to say, do you adhere by these sort of rules of conduct in terms of how you pay your workers, and are you ensure they're getting rest, and are you ensure that they're not being put into horrendous conditions to look at harmful content that's not pre-screened, let's say, by another AI tool. So those are things that we're definitely advocating for across the value chain, so that we're pulling those levers everywhere in policy. We're actually looking at the procurement officers within corporations, enterprise groups, where they're saying, oh, it's, the foundational models or own the data. It's not us. But then the foundation folks say it's how the enterprise groups are using and building on top of that data. So we're trying to have a level of accountability there. So then we're also taking it to the VCs. We're taking it to the investor groups and making sure that there's some levels of risk assessments that they should say, you don't want this to be that's going to hinder your investment in this company because they have unethical data sourcing and unethical practices for their workers. So that is, something that's very real and very true. And we also feel that livable wages are important because you will have companies come in and take advantage of communities because they feel they can underpay them at market rate compared to what they're using for the data. But we're trying to say that we're advocating that they have to have at least minimal livable wages within their own communities.
I would say I think all data annotators should sign up to be a member of the Data Labelers Association. We have Joan Kinyua, the president here. And I really believe all data annotators, like all over Africa, should sign up to be a member, and because it's inherent for a commercial company to minimize costs. And that in its way is an extractive process. And that's why we have unions. Unions cater for the concerns and the challenges of the workers, the people who are doing the actual work. I came from Canada and my flight got delayed, and it was chaos because Air Canada, the airline, apparently did not agree to increase the wages of the workers who have been living beyond the minimum wage, and they've not been paid for many of the things they've been doing. And so if it's one person trying to stand up to like a big company, it's infeasible. And yes, there are rules and guidelines and all the stuff, but the company it's still the situation. But unions help because unions coalesce and bring together the different workers and then advocate for. It's a stronger force to advocate for the rights and say this is the change that we want. So I really love that we have unions like the Data Labelers Association based in Africa, based on the experiences and concerns and challenges of African data annotators. And I believe a viable path would be perhaps having more of such unions, or perhaps giving more funding and more support to these unions to continue to advocate for the rights of data labelers and data annotators.
Yeah, I agree, because we need to understand the power that we hold. They need us and they need our data. And in so many ways, if we can come together and fight for our rights and fight for the things that we need, we can actually get these things. Okay, so I'm going to open the floor. We are out of time, so I'm going to take 2 questions from the floor, unfortunately. You can meet with them after the panel session. So I'm going to take him, because he's been raising his hand, says and him. Okay, 3 questions. Okay, let's take the 2 first.
I will be very quick, but I wanted to just finish because Vukosi posed a question. And so we did a study of Claude. We tested the 13 official languages of Mali, some of which are low resource. And we were astonished by how capable Claude was. And we weren't testing specifically if they had used our data sets, but it's hard to believe that that wasn't part of the performance. But the question about acknowledgement, actually, in Mali, we are not allowed to use Claude. It's not licensed for Mali, and it's geo-blocked. So the only way that we were able to run the test was to pretend that we were in Senegal with a VPN and a Senegalese phone number. Okay, so my question, my colleague and I were giving her thumbs up to, Chris gave a kind of definition of quality, which is ultimately what works well in training a model that makes a model that works well in the real world, right? It's not noise or it's not other things. I'd like to ask specifically about the issue of code switching, which all of us know in all African languages is so dominant, and we're still dealing a lot with instructions like no code switching. That messes things up. And I'm really wondering, like, maybe what we should be doing is just capturing the way that people speak.
Idris, and there are some comments, very quick comments, but then one is, I think we've been emphasizing on the ability of we have to ensure that our datasets are findable. So how do we ensure the balance between findable data and then integrity of benchmark? If we have benchmarks that are easily findable, then those benchmarks are used in the development of these models. So do we have to create new benchmarks whenever we want to do evaluation? The second thing here is we've been saying here, there are endangered languages. There is Hausa that now Albert is saying that might be not a low resource language. But the issue with that is although the support for most of our languages is improving by the day whenever these new models are being developed, but do we not think maybe in 10 years' time, and a quick example is when people do social media, someone will coin a term, and eventually that term will be part of the evolution of that language. How sure are we maybe in 10 years, 20 years, the standard Hausa will not be the GPT Hausa? Not necessarily the original Hausa that is supposed to be in either that is supposed to be spoken. Thank you.
I think right now the standard Hausa is not, the GPT Hausa is not even the standard. There's still some issues with it in that. I would address your question. Yes, to the idea of code switching and just capturing data that communicates the way people actually interact in that language. And so these instructions unfortunately, they're sometimes not made by those who are on the ground actually involved with the community and collecting the data with the community. They're made from higher ups that have this idea of what quality should look like. The suggestion is that these instructions and decisions about quality should be made with an understanding of the target use case and like the downstream target use case. So not just, I'm going to create data, put in a CSV, upload to Hugging Face, that's the end. But what would this data be used for? And so from that understanding, then influencing the instructions that we have in terms of quality. So for example, in this case, it makes sense that you should actually capture the code switching behavior and rather figure out how to do your annotation that also helps to bring out the code switching instead of saying do not do code switching.
Okay, wait, before you go, another dimension I want to add to that question, apart from just how we use the data in the real world, is the cultural context of it. Because if you ask most of the LLMs about colonialism, for example, you most likely get the Western view rather than the local view of this thing. So it's also a dimension to that question of is the data representative of us as a people and as the way we interact in the real world and the history and the way our perspective generally?
Yeah, I will leave the last question that you asked Vukosi and to answer. That's too difficult for me. But I wanted to go to that question and that question. To your question on data quality, and again, I'm so sad that there are no funders here, but I believe we have scientists. One of the things we did at Lacuna Fund is we didn't tell you to do this and this and this for data quality. We simply said in your proposal, you should have a data quality plan. And so it was up to the creator of the data set to decide what that plan would look like. All right, and I think that was a good approach in the sense that people came up with all interesting ways of what data quality plan would look like, right? And I think that was a way better approach than telling people this is what we expect from the data quality, right? And then to answer your question on what happens 10 years later, this is also something that Lacuna Fund struggled with, and it was called the sustainability plan, right? So what makes your data sustainable? What makes your data relevant 3-4 years down the line, right? She mentioned documentation. I think that's one of the best things you can do to your data set when it comes to documentation, when it comes to sustainability. But also, having a sustainability plan means knowing when this data will be updated, why it will be updated, and all that kind of information. And also, that's another thing that Lacuna Fund ensured. Like, you had to come up with a sustainability plan 10, 15 years down the line. The only challenge, however, was the grant that was given didn't cover the sustainability plan. So you also have to think about now who's going to fund the sustainability, right? Because you have money to create a grant within 1 year, but then you need this grant, you need this data set to be alive for the next 20 years. How does that sustainability plan look like? Yeah.
It seems we should have now a new. We must create a new dataset sustainability fund. It might be another thing to get it. Sorry, Jessica, your question
was cultural perspective.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. I think that goes back to something I think maybe what Idris was asking in terms of the evaluations and everything. I think it's a very big, important piece for the next. So there's the one part of thinking about the training, right? The training comes with all the issues of the humongous amount of data that needs to be there, the computing that you have to get, and then all of the skills and everything to actually run these things all the time. But then at the same time, I think even probably touching on what's being asked about code switching, it's very important that we actually also create evaluation data sets. That also, same thing, high quality, well documented, explain what they are supposed to be about. Like really, this is what we're evaluating. Because I believe, in the parts of, if somebody is selling a product and says that it's the everything machine that works in every language, they must prove it. And that is going to take that there's data out there. It is unfortunate. I know now we're all doing this work of trying to now, what do people say? We're trying to figure out, we're the janitors now of this, because now we're trying to show that there's all of this, dirt. And then at the same time, we're then being asked to be the ones who fix it or clean it up. But we need to be able to show this, right? That yes, most of the conversations, I'm from South Africa, I'm from Pretoria, people speak Sipitori. It's very hard. I've traveled and I go to Botswana or I go to the Northwest province and people speak Setswana, and it's still even today, it just does not make any sense. I know they're speaking proper Setswana, but then it doesn't, because I'm from a place where people will speak in 4 languages in one sentence. All right, so we have to then, I have then gone, and maybe that's a challenge for me and the people who work on Sipitori to say, yeah, let's actually start quantifying this use. So it will be important. It is the bane of, I think, a lot of our existence is just code switching. And we know, because it's the truth, right? We know that it's the truth, and getting systems to work very well for that will make people just be. They don't need to change. And then, yeah, that's it.
I mean, I'm not African, but I am African American, and so I would say cultural capital is what we're talking about, right? We're talking about the authenticity of a culture and who has say over what's authentic or not. And so, if it's not a part of the evaluation process to have inclusive, participatory evaluation with the subject. Because if you're just using them as a subject to capture the content and have someone else to evaluate and vet it, then are you truly being authentic? Are you ethics washing it? And so I think, or cultural washing it. So I think you need to have that those folks participate in the entire cycle of that data collection, and even as a part of the evaluation.
Yes, I agree. Okay, we're going to take one more question. Okay.
Thank you very much for an excellent, very informative panel discussion. So I'm a faculty member at a university, King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia, and my question is about data sovereignty. So in the Saudi context, they've taken a very firm stand on data sovereignty with very detailed policies and recommendations, or policies and requirements, I should say. They're not recommendations anymore, that Saudi data must live in Saudi Arabia. And this includes things like running data through LLM inference. The data that goes through the models themselves need to be hosted in Saudi Arabia. And they've given some, exemptions, temporary exemptions to use cloud providers outside of Saudi Arabia for a limited number of years until those cloud providers build physical infrastructure in the kingdom, at which point everybody is required to migrate their infrastructure to those cloud providers in the kingdom. So they've been very, very specific and very prescriptive about it. Now, so that's within the Saudi context. So my question is, would that work in the African context, or would it lead to significant, because there are so many countries on the continent of Africa, even if you had the large ones following that, you had South Africa, Tanzania, Kenya, Nigeria, everybody creating their little silo, would that lead to fragmentation that would be undesirable? And so how should data sovereignty look in the African context?
I'll quickly use the one in terms of, I'm hoping there'll be a technical part. No, in terms of like what the thing, but I want to talk about on the policy side. So I think some of the things that you're seeing across the continent, that there's a few of the hyperscalers that are coming up, and then some of the big tech companies taking up those as places to put up data centers and put in storage and compute, is more that I think they're already preempting that there's likely policy that is coming that I think maybe connected to yesterday's panel, that might be kind of it must be on the African continent. It must be so we're hoping. It's just that it takes a long time for the AU to have anything actually cover everything. But I think they're preempting that part, that the AU might pass, I think just like there is actually a GDPR for Africa. It's called the Malabo Convention. All right, so now it's like preempting that. The next step is obviously to say, then all of those, whatever's happening with the data must happen locally, and you would be blocked in terms of, especially let's say not social media service or anything like that, but then all these things where you're storing citizen data, all of those things have to be somewhere on the continent where they are reachable if they have to be a thing. So I think that's why that's happening. So I'm not talking about the fragmentation. I'm just saying I think there's already some work to make sure that they're getting ready for that.
I am desperately hoping it happens, and I hope it happens the Saudi way, progressively. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I think as African economies, sometimes we tend not to think about data as a component of the economy. Because if you look at, for example, how much Kenya protects the kind of things we import, you would really understand what goes on, right? So you can't just randomly import tea into Kenya, right? Because we think, we have a lot of tea in Kenya. Why should we be allowing tea to come into the country? We need to protect the local market for the Kenyan people, right? And when we think about data from an economic perspective, think about what happens when this cloud infrastructure and all this AI infrastructure moves into conflict. First of all, we're creating a lot of high quality jobs, right? Anybody know how much roughly a cloud engineer earns? Right? We're having all those jobs opening in the country, and I'm really hoping we do that. But that's not the only component. It means that the entire economy of running that data is moved to that particular economy. But what I find in global conversations is sometimes that people forget how big Africa is, right? If Luxembourg, with about 500,000 people, can have a policy of data must stay within Luxembourg, why is Kenya with 56 million people? Most of the time, when you speak to the big tech, we are being shown on how that's not possible. And I understand, yes, maybe our consumption is not high enough to warrant a server within the continent or these kind of things and that kind of thing. But I'm looking at long term and thinking the jobs we're going to create, the entire economy of jobs we're going to create around that infrastructure is really important for the country, right? So it's not just about data sovereignty for the sake of it. It's also that. But also the more critical point here is nowadays we have information systems on almost everything. Would you be okay with the idea of your police data being hosted in a server in Luxembourg, right? Imagine all the criminal records of people. The national intelligence is using all data. All that data is being stored somewhere, right? So that's an important element to think about it. Like there's some data that is just way too sensitive to allow to cross the border. And we should look at that economy from that perspective. The same way we govern what can be imported and what can be exported from a particular country, we can also think about the same with data. What category of data should never leave the continent? I don't want my medical data leaving the continent. I don't want my criminal, I'm not a criminal, but I'm just saying, I don't want my my police records and fingerprints and all that kind of thing leaving the continent. So that's kind of where I see it. And I love that Saudi is taking those steps and very aggressively. And we're hoping that there's going to be directions from the African Union on how we can, Vukosi sits in those committees, so we are hoping we can get clear records, directions on where we're heading when it comes to that from an African perspective. And it doesn't also have to be like every country doing its things. Africa has done so well in terms of regional integration. East African community is an example of that, right? Can we pick it up from there? So that's my thoughts around that, yeah.
You know, I agree that it will be a good thing, but I also want to be mindful when I said earlier about sovereignty of personal data sovereignty, and also that you don't want to have it, the government collection and ownership of that data be infringement upon civil rights and human rights. And so to be mindful of our own personal data and how we have ownership over that. And so when sovereignty comes about, is it, okay, it's about national security, but then what is it about personal, authority over what they can do with their data and how that data is being used? And so not to have a level of transparency. And I honestly feel like the government should be the stewards of that data, but the community needs to be the owner of that data.
Well, this has been very informative. I hope we've all learned one thing or the other with this. And with that, we'd like to thank our panelists for very insightful discussions.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very, very much for making it to our workshop. It's been super, super wonderful to have you. We had the keynotes, we had the lightning talks, we had the unique breakout session. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And then we had more lightning talks and then the panel. I just want to round up by just giving a kind of a brief summary. The Centering Data in the African AI workshop, the aim of this workshop was to put African data, and by African data, we actually mean the people behind the AI. You know, AI is such a buzzword nowadays, and when we talk AI, we like to think of the flashy things, the flashy AI models and the applications that we have. It's it's becoming increasingly difficult to, when you see an AI something, it's very difficult to see the people behind the AI. So as Joan was saying, there are actually data annotators who are annotating harmful content and going through a lot of mental health problems just so that we can enjoy the application that we see. But when we look at the application and we look at the things that we use, it's very easy to not think of the people. So this workshop was made specifically for us to sit down and really think of us as the people and the community that actually power the AI. We power the AI through the data sets that we create, through the data sets that we annotate, that we moderate, and through the different aspects of the data that we create in the African ecosystem. And so in this workshop, we mean to come together and think about the different aspects of the data, the diversity, governance, who benefits from the data, mental health. Are the data annotators actually getting fair compensation? Are they fairly treated? How can we ensure better, more scalable local innovation? How can we address the other aspects of data like the compute and infrastructure? So I hope that after this workshop, you feel great. You feel like you gain something. You feel empowered as an African that, yeah, this ChatGPT thing or this Claude thing, I'm there, even though it's not showing my name or it's not acknowledging me. We have something to do with that because that is the reality. I also hope that from this workshop, during the breakout session, you were able to, for the first time, actually give your voice to a report that's sort of looking at what does it mean to center data in African AI. We will be reaching out to via the emails that you put in the form to show you how the report is, what's there, and to let you preview, edit, and give your feedback. And we'll be publishing it and acknowledging everyone as co-authors and doing our first African style coming together to discuss. I hope you enjoyed it. And I want you to take home one thing. AI is the people, and through the people we create the data. And so when we want to talk about AI, it's very important to first and foremost put the people, put ourselves as people, put the communities as people, and think about AI from those perspectives. Thank you once again. I hope our paths do cross and your paths do cross, and have a blessed, wonderful day.